The laughter echoed through the mahogany-paneled boardroom like shattered glass. "Get out! You don't belong here!" Richard Connell's voice dripped with contempt as he pointed at the elderly black janitor frozen in the doorway. But in exactly 17 minutes, that same man would own this room, and every soul in it would know the price of their arrogance. Welcome to the story that shook Silicon Valley to its core. I'm sharing this from Seattle today. Comment your city below, so I can see how far this story travels. The morning fog hadn't lifted from the San Francisco Bay when Jonas Harvey parked his 1997 Honda Civic in the underground garage of Pinnacle Tech's gleaming 40-story tower. At 71 years old, his hands bore the calluses of a lifetime's work, though today they would grip a mop handle instead of a boardroom gavel. He adjusted the worn name tag that read simply Joe and pulled the gray janitor's uniform over his lean frame. "You ready for this, Mr. Harvey?" Marcus. His driver, who'd been waiting in a nearby luxury sedan, whispered through the cracked window. 43 years I built this company," Jonas replied, his voice steady as granite. "Time to see what they've done with my legacy." The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt like descending into a gladiator's arena. Jonas had founded Pinnacle Tech in his garage back in 1982, nurturing it from a two-person startup into a billion-dollar enterprise. But 5 years ago, a hostile board coup during his wife Elena's cancer battle had forced him to step back, maintaining only his majority shares, while the company culture he'd carefully cultivated began to rot from within. The elevator dinged softly. The doors parted to reveal the executive floor's Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Jonas pushed his janitor's cart forward, its wheels squeaking against the polished floor, a deliberate touch he'd added that morning. "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" The voice belonged to Samantha Chen, one of the newer executive assistants. Her tone wasn't unkind, merely puzzled. She stood holding a tablet, her professional blazer impeccable even at 6:47 a.m. "Maintenance called me up," Jonas mumbled, affecting a slight stoop. "Said the boardroom needs special attention before the big meeting." Samantha frowned, checking her tablet. "I don't have any maintenance scheduled, but I suppose with the Westfield merger meeting everything needs to be perfect." She studied him for a moment, something flickering in her eyes. "Have we met before? You look familiar?" Jonas kept his gaze down. "I got one of those faces, miss. Been cleaning buildings in this city for 30 years. She nodded slowly, then gestured toward the boardroom. "Well, please be finished by 7:30. Mr. Connell absolutely cannot tolerate any disruptions." Richard Connell. The name tasted bitter in Jonas's mouth. The man who'd orchestrated his removal, who'd promised to maintain Pinnacle's values while systematically dismantling every diversity program, every employee advancement initiative, every trace of the company Jonas had built. The boardroom doors were solid oak with chrome handles that caught the early morning light. Jonas pushed them open to reveal the inner sanctum of corporate power, a massive oval table of Brazilian rosewood surrounded by 20 leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. The eastern wall was entirely glass, offering a view that stretched from the Golden Gate to the Bay Bridge. Jonas began his performance methodically wiping down surfaces, while his keen eyes absorbed every detail. The merger documents were already laid out at each seat marked Confidential, Westfield Acquisition. He glanced at the numbers as he cleaned around them. His mind, still sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, immediately caught the discrepancies. "They're cooking the books," he muttered under his breath. The quarterly projections were inflated by at least 30%. Operational costs had been mysteriously omitted from 3 departments. It was fraud, plain and simple, designed to make Pinnacle look more valuable than it was. "What did you say?" Jonas spun around. A young black man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, a coffee cup in hand. His name tag read, Jamal Washington, Junior Analyst. "Nothing, sir," Jonas replied, returning to his cleaning. Jamal stepped closer, his voice dropping. "No, I heard you. You said they're cooking the books." He glanced at the documents Jonas had been near. "You can read these. You understand what they mean." Jonas met the young man's eyes for just a moment. Sometimes people see things others miss, son. Before Jamal could respond, voices echoed from the hallway. Jonas recognized Richard Connell's booming laugh immediately, the same laugh that had filled this room 5 years ago when they'd voted to restructure the company leadership. "Jamal, what the hell are you doing in here?" Richard entered like a storm system, his presence immediately changing the room's atmospheric pressure. At 55, he maintained himself with the obsessive care of a man who believed appearance was everything. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed to mathematical precision, his suit worth more than Jonas's supposed janitor's annual salary. "I was reviewing the merger documents, Mr. Connell," Jamal replied, his posture straightening. "Junior analysts don't review anything without supervision." Richard's eyes were cold steel. "And why is the janitor still here?" "We have a $100 billion deal to close today." "I'm almost finished, sir," Jonas said, pushing his cart toward the door. "Wait." Richard's voice cut through the air. He walked over to Jonas, standing uncomfortably close. "You look familiar. Have you cleaned this floor before?" "Many times, sir." Richard studied him for a long moment, then deliberately knocked over his coffee cup, the brown liquid spreading across the pristine marble floor. "Well then, you'll know how to clean that up. Can't have the Westfield executives thinking we run a sloppy ship." Jonas felt the familiar fire in his chest, the same rage he'd learned to master over decades of facing men like Richard. But he simply nodded, pulling out his mop. "Actually, Mr. Connell," Jamal started. You can get back to your desk where you belong," Richard interrupted. "Unless you'd prefer to join the cleaning staff permanently. We've been looking to make some cuts in the analyst department." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Jamal's jaw clenched, but he nodded and left. Richard watched him go with satisfaction, then turned back to Jonas. "You know what your problem is?" Richard said, his voice low enough that only Jonas could hear. "Your generation never learned their place, always thinking you deserve something just for showing up." Jonas continued, mopping each stroke deliberate and measured. "Nothing to say." "Good. At least you know when to keep your mouth shut." Richard pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "Unlike some people around here who think their opinions matter." The next 20 minutes passed in a carefully choreographed dance. More executives arrived, each greeting Richard with the calculated warmth of people who feared him. Jonas observed them all. Victoria Walsh, the CEO who'd replaced him, a woman who spoke about leadership but never led. Martin Bryce, the head of operations, who'd once been Jonas's protege, now reduced to Richard's yes man. Diane Rodriguez from HR, who kept glancing at Jonas with an expression he couldn't quite read. At 7:25, Jonas began wheeling his cart toward the door. "Hold on," Richard called out. "You missed a spot." Jonas turned. The floor was spotless. Richard smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Right there by Victoria's chair. I want it perfect." Jonas returned, kneeling beside the CEO's chair to clean an imaginary stain. As he did, he heard Richard whisper to Martin, "Look at him. Probably been doing this his whole life. Some people are just born to serve, you know." Martin laughed uncomfortably. "Richard, come on. What I'm just stating facts. It's not racist if it's true. Hell, we employ plenty of them, just not in positions they can't handle." Victoria Walsh entered at that moment, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown timer. At 48, she carried herself with the studied grace of someone who'd learned power rather than earned it. She paused, seeing Jonas on his knees beside her chair. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Just making sure everything's perfect for you, Victoria," Richard said smoothly. "Can't have the help slacking off on the most important day of the quarter." She looked at Jonas for a long moment. Something passed across her face, recognition guilt. But then she simply stepped around him and took her seat. "The Westfield team will be here in 30 minutes. Is everyone prepared?" Jonas stood slowly, his knees protesting only partially an act. As he moved toward the door, he deliberately paused by the presentation screen controls. his fingers brushing against the USB port hidden beneath the podium's edge. The tiny recording device he'd placed there weeks ago was still active, its red light invisible unless you knew where to look. Actually, Jonas said, his voice carrying just enough to make everyone turn, those numbers are wrong. The room froze. Richard's face flushed red. Excuse me. Jonas pointed to the open document in front of the nearest executive. Page 43. You're showing a 30% growth in the cloud division, but you haven't accounted for the AWS contract that's ending next month. That's $40 million in recurring revenue that won't exist by Q3. How dare you? Richard started moving toward him, but Victoria raised her hand. Wait. She grabbed the document, flipping to page 43. Her face paled. He's right. How did we miss this? A janitor cannot possibly. Richard sputtered. A janitor who can read, Jonas said quietly. Sometimes that's all it takes. Diane Rodriguez was staring at him now with intense curiosity. What's your name? She asked. Joe, Jonas replied. Joe what? He met her gaze steadily. Just Joe. Richard had recovered his composure, his voice turning venomous. Security needs to know about this. We have a janitor accessing confidential documents. That's corporate espionage. I didn't access anything, Jonas said calmly. They were lying open on the table. Anyone with eyes could see them. Anyone with eyes and a Harvard MBA, apparently. Diane murmured, still studying Jonas intently. Get out, Richard commanded, pointing at the door. Get out right now or I'll have you arrested. Jonas nodded, gripping his cart. But as he reached the door, he turned back one more time. You might want to check page 72 as well, unless you want Westfield to discover you've been hiding the Henderson lawsuit settlement. This time, Victoria stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. What Henderson lawsuit? Richard's face had gone from red to white. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Diane asked, her voice sharp. Jonas allowed himself a small smile. Just trying to help. After all, isn't that what us janitors are for? He left them in chaos, voices rising as documents rustled and accusations flew. In the hallway, he pulled out a simple flip phone and sent a single text, Phase 1 complete. The response came immediately. The board is assembling. 15 minutes. Jonas wheeled his cart to the service elevator, his mind already preparing for the next act. But as the doors closed, he heard footsteps running toward him. Wait! Hold the elevator! It was Diane Rodriguez. She slipped inside just as the doors closed, slightly out of breath. You're not a janitor, she said. It wasn't a question. Jonas said nothing. She pulled out her phone, showing him a photograph from 5 years ago, the last official portrait taken of Pinnacle Tech's founder before his resignation. The man in the photo was younger, healthier, wearing a $10,000 suit instead of a janitor's uniform, but the eyes were unmistakable. My God, she whispered. You're Jonas Harvey. He finally looked at her directly. And you're the HR director who's been documenting every violation, every incident of discrimination, every hostile action taken by Richard Connell for the past 3 years. Her eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? Because I still have friends in this building, Ms. Rodriguez. People who believe in what this company used to stand for. He pulled out a business card, not the janitor's ID he'd been wearing, but one that simply read, Jonas Harvey, majority shareholder, Pinnacle Technologies. Why? She asked. Why the disguise? Why now? Because I needed to see it for myself. The reports, the numbers, the spreadsheets, they don't show you the cancer that's eating this company alive. But watching Richard Connell knock over that coffee cup, hearing him talk about people knowing their place, seeing Victoria's silence in the face of blatant discrimination, that tells me everything I need to know. The elevator continued its descent. Diane was quiet for a moment, then said, "The Henderson lawsuit that was about racial discrimination, wasn't it Richard buried it?" "Along with 17 others," Jonas confirmed. "All settled quietly, all with NDAs, all hidden from the board and shareholders. The Westfield merger is built on fraudulent data and will collapse the moment they do their due diligence. Unless, of course, someone intervenes first." The elevator opened at the 3rd floor. Jonas pushed his cart out, but Diane followed. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Jonas smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn all morning. "Everything you've documented. Every complaint, every violation, every piece of evidence Richard thought he'd buried. Can you have it ready in 10 minutes? I can have it ready in 5. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Harvey Jamal Washington, the analyst who stood up to Richard this morning, he's brilliant. Graduated top of his class from Stanford, but Richard has him doing entry-level work blocks every promotion opportunity." "I know about Jamal," Jonas said. "His real name is on a very different list than the one Richard keeps." As Diane hurried away, Jonas made his way to a small maintenance room he'd been using as a makeshift office. Inside, Marcus waited with a garment bag. "How did it go?" Marcus asked. "Better than expected," Jonas replied, already pulling off the janitor's uniform. Richard showed his true colors within minutes. The recording device caught everything. "The board will be assembled in the auxiliary conference room in 7 minutes." Jonas pulled on the tailored suit, the transformation remarkable. The stoop disappeared. The shuffle became a stride, and the mumbling janitor was replaced by the man who'd built an empire. "Make sure security knows to escort Richard out when the time comes. But gently, we're not him." Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone to make arrangements. Jonas checked his watch. 7:53 a.m. The Westfield executives would be arriving any moment, walking into what they thought would be a standard merger meeting. Instead, they'd witness the complete restructuring of Pinnacle Tech's leadership. His phone buzzed. A message from Diane. "Files uploaded to secure server. 18 lawsuits, 43 complaints, 6 EEOC violations. All documented, all verified." Another message, this one from an unknown number. "Mr. Harvey, this is Jamal Washington. I don't know how you knew about the books, but there's more. Richard's been siphoning money through offshore accounts. I have proof." Jonas smiled grimly. The young analyst had been doing his own investigation. Perhaps there was hope for Pinnacle's future after all. He made his way to the auxiliary conference room where 12 board members were already assembled. Some looked confused, others worried, but all stood when he entered. "Jonas," breathed Margaret Chen, one of the original board members who'd voted against his removal 5 years ago. "Is it really you?" "It's really me, Margaret." He took his place at the head of the table. "And we have exactly 6 minutes before Richard Connell discovers that his merger meeting is about to become his termination hearing." "On what grounds?" asked Thomas Brennan, one of Richard's allies on the board. Jonas connected his laptop to the presentation screen. "On the grounds of gross misconduct, financial fraud, and creating a hostile work environment that has exposed this company to over $200 million in potential lawsuits." The room erupted in gasps and hurried conversation, but Jonas raised his hand for silence. "But first," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built an empire from nothing. "Let me tell you what I saw this morning when I walked these halls as a janitor. Let me tell you about the Pinnacle Tech that Richard Connell has created, and why it needs to die today, so that something better can be reborn." He clicked to the first slide, a photograph of Richard knocking over the coffee cup, captured by the security camera Jonas had made sure was positioned perfectly. "It started with a spilled cup of coffee," Jonas began, "and it's going to end with a complete reformation of this company's soul." Meanwhile, 3 floors up, Richard Connell was holding court in the boardroom, regaling the early arrivals with stories of his management philosophy. He had no idea that the janitor he'd humiliated was about to become his judge, jury, and executioner. The key to leadership, Richard was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of a man who'd never questioned his own authority, is knowing who belongs at the table and who belongs serving it. Victoria Walsh shifted uncomfortably in her seat, that nagging feeling from earlier growing stronger. Something about that janitor Joe had seemed so familiar. The way he'd held himself even while kneeling, the precision of his language when pointing out the financial discrepancies. "Richard," she interrupted, "about those numbers the janitor mentioned. Already handled," Richard said dismissively, though she noticed he hadn't actually looked at the pages in question. Probably just saw some preliminary drafts. You know how these people are always trying to seem more important than they are. These people... The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Diane Rodriguez stood there, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was Jamal Washington, and behind them a security team that was decidedly not following Richard's usual protocols. "Diane, what is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded. "The meaning," Diane said, stepping aside, "is that the board has called an emergency session. All executives are required to attend immediately." "That's impossible. I wasn't notified." "You were notified." Diane held up her tablet. 17 minutes ago. You chose not to check your messages because you were too busy explaining your theories about who belongs where. The Westfield executives who had just arrived looked confused. Their lead negotiator, Harrison Westfield himself, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, stood up. "Perhaps we should postpone." "Actually, Mr. Westfield," Diane said, "the board specifically requested your presence as well. They believe you'll find the next hour quite illuminating." Victoria stood, her CEO's instincts finally overriding her confusion. "Diane, as CEO, I demand to know." "With respect, Ms. Walsh, you're about to find out exactly what your title is worth when weighed against 67% ownership of this company." The blood drained from Victoria's face. 67%. There was only one person who held that much stock in Pinnacle Tech. "No," Richard said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. "He wouldn't dare." "He would," said a familiar voice from behind the security team. "And he has." Jonas Harvey walked into the boardroom he'd built, wearing the suit he'd earned, carrying the authority he'd never truly relinquished. The janitor's stoop was gone, replaced by the bearing of a man who'd started with nothing and built everything. "Hello, Richard," Jonas said, his voice calm as a midnight ocean. "I believe we need to discuss your performance review." The room erupted. Executives jumped to their feet, voices raised in shock, confusion, and in Richard's case, rage. "This is impossible," Richard shouted. "You were the janitor." "Yes," Jonas said simply. "I was the janitor. For 3 hours this morning, I cleaned your floors, emptied your trash, and listened to every word you said when you thought no one who mattered was listening." He pulled out a small digital recorder from his pocket. Richard's voice filled the room. "Some people are just born to serve, you know. Then, it's not racist if it's true. Then, we employ plenty of them, just not in positions they can't handle." The Westfield executives were backing toward the door, but Jonas raised his hand. "Please stay, Mr. Westfield. You're about to learn why doing business with Pinnacle Tech under its current leadership would have destroyed your company's reputation." Harrison Westfield, who'd built his own empire on integrity and sharp judgment, nodded slowly and retook his seat. "I'm listening." Jonas moved to the presentation screen, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Diane, if you would." Diane connected her tablet, and suddenly the screen filled with documents, lawsuits, complaints, financial records, email chains. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized. 18 racial discrimination lawsuits settled secretly. Jonas began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. 43 formal complaints of hostile work environment buried in HR. 6 EEOC violations that Richard personally intervened to suppress. "Those were all handled appropriately," Richard started. By paying victims to sign NDAs and threatening their careers if they spoke out, Jonas continued. Including Marcus Thompson, a brilliant engineer who Richard demoted to facilities management because he, quote, didn't look like leadership material. But that's not even the worst part. Jamal Washington spoke up, stepping forward with his own laptop. Mr. Connell has been embezzling funds through a network of offshore accounts. I have 3 years of forensic accounting that proves it. Richard lunged toward Jamal, but security stepped between them. You have no idea what you're talking about. Actually, Jonas said, he knows exactly what he's talking about. Because unlike you, Richard, I judge people by their capabilities, not their skin color. Jamal has been conducting his own investigation for months, building a case that the SEC will find very interesting. Victoria Walsh had been silent through all of this, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. Finally, she spoke. I didn't know about the embezzlement. Jonas turned to her, his expression softening slightly. But you knew about the discrimination. You sat in meetings where Richard made his views clear. You watched qualified people of color be passed over for promotions. You saw the culture of this company rot from within, and you said nothing. I thought if I could just maintain stability. Stability built on injustice is not stability, Victoria. It's complicity. The boardroom doors opened again. The full board of directors filed in, led by Margaret Chen. Her face was grim as she looked at Richard. The board has voted, she announced. Effective immediately, Richard Connell is terminated for cause. Security will escort him from the building. His accounts have been frozen pending investigation. You can't do this, Richard shouted, his face purple with rage. I made this company profitable. I increased share value by 40%. By cooking the books and creating liability that could bankrupt us, Margaret replied coldly. Jonas showed us everything, Richard. Every fraudulent report, every hidden lawsuit, every crime you thought you'd buried. As security moved toward him, Richard made one last desperate play. Victoria, tell them how I saved this company from his outdated diversity nonsense. Tell them how profit matters more than political correctness. Victoria stood slowly, and for a moment, Richard's face lit with hope. Then she spoke. I resign, she said quietly. Effective immediately. I failed in my duty as CEO. I allowed fear and comfort to override my moral obligations. I'm as guilty as Richard, just in a different way. Jonas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. The board will accept your resignation. As Richard was led out, still shouting threats and obscenities, Jonas turned to address the room. The Westfield executives, the remaining Pinnacle leadership, and the board all waited in silence. Pinnacle Tech was founded on a simple principle, Jonas began. That talent exists everywhere in every community, in every background. That innovation comes from diversity of thought, and diversity of thought comes from diversity of people. We lost sight of that. We traded our soul for quarterly earnings that weren't even real. He clicked to a new slide showing Pinnacle's original mission statement from 1982. Today we return to our roots. Diane Rodriguez will serve as Interim Chief Diversity Officer with full authority to reform our corporate culture. Jamal Washington will lead a new financial transparency task force reporting directly to the board. And as for CEO, he paused, looking around the room. I'll be resuming that position effective immediately until we can find someone who understands that true leadership isn't about keeping people in their place, it's about helping them rise to their potential. Harrison Westfield stood up. Mr. Harvey, about the merger. Is off the table, Jonas said firmly. The numbers Richard showed you were fraudulent. But if you're interested in a legitimate partnership, one built on real data and shared values, I'm willing to discuss it. Westfield smiled, the expression of a man who recognized integrity when he saw it. I think I'd like that very much. As the room began to empty, Jonas caught Jamal's arm. Your investigation was impressive. How long have you known who I was? Jamal grinned. About 10 seconds after you pointed out the accounting error. Richard never bothered to learn that I wrote my thesis on your early business strategies. I recognized your analytical pattern immediately. And you kept quiet. I figured you had your reasons. Plus, Jamal's expression hardened. I wanted to see Richard hang himself with his own rope. He's made the last 2 years hell for anyone who didn't look like him. Well, that ends today. I want you to consider a new position, Senior Vice President of Financial Compliance. The board's already approved it. Jamal's eyes widened. Sir, that's a 4-level promotion. That's what you should have had a year ago if talent was actually being evaluated fairly. What do you say? I say yes, absolutely. As Jamal left, barely containing his excitement, Diane approached Jonas. Why the janitor disguise? She asked. You could have just called a board meeting, shown the evidence. Jonas looked out the window at the city below. His city, the one where he'd started with nothing but determination and a belief that America's promise should extend to everyone. Because evidence can be disputed, Diane, but experiencing it firsthand, feeling that dismissal, that contempt, that assumption that you're less than human because of your job or your skin color, that's visceral, that's undeniable. He turned back to her. The board needed to see not just what Richard did, but who he really was. And I needed to remind myself why I started this company in the first place. Not for the money or the power, but to create opportunities for people who are systematically denied them. And now we rebuild. We find every person Richard pushed down and give them the chance to rise. We make this company what it always should have been, a place where the janitor's ideas are just as valuable as the CEO's, where talent is recognized regardless of its packaging. He pulled out the janitor's name tag, Joe, and placed it on the boardroom table. I'm keeping this, he said, as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone else ignores. As the morning sun finally burned through the San Francisco fog, Jonas Harvey stood in the boardroom he'd built, lost, and reclaimed. But the real victory wasn't in the corporate coup he'd just executed. It was in the message that would ripple through Silicon Valley, and beyond that, discrimination disguised as business acumen was still discrimination, that power without principle was ultimately powerless, and that sometimes, just sometimes, justice could be served by the very hands that others assumed were only fit for serving others. The phone on the conference table rang. Margaret Chen answered. It listened for a moment, then handed it to Jonas with a smile. It's the media, she said. Word's already out about Richard's termination and your return. They want a statement. Jonas took the phone, thinking about all the young black professionals who'd been told they didn't belong, all the brilliant minds dismissed because of their appearance, all the janitors and service workers whose intelligence was ignored because of their uniforms. Tell them, he said, his voice clear and strong, that Pinnacle Tech just remembered its soul, and we're going to make sure it never forgets it again. As he spoke to the reporters, he didn't see the janitor who'd stopped in the hallway outside the boardroom listening. Miguel Santos, who'd been cleaning these floors for 15 years, who had a master's degree in computer science from his home country, but could never get anyone to look past his accent and his mop. But Diane Rodriguez saw him. She walked over, handed him her business card, and said the words that would change his life. Mr. Harvey wants to meet with you. He's particularly interested in the efficiency software you've been sketching during your breaks. Miguel's eyes filled with tears. You know about that? Mr. Harvey knows about everyone who's been overlooked. That's why he came back, to make things right. As the morning progressed, the transformation of Pinnacle Tech began. Not with press releases or corporate speak, but with real change. The janitorial staff received notifications of a new education program fully funded to help them pursue whatever careers they desired. The diversity positions that Richard had eliminated were not just restored, but expanded. And in the lobby where Richard had once hung portraits of himself and his hand-picked executives, Jonas commissioned a new installation, photographs of every employee from the CEO to the night security guard, with a simple inscription, "Innovation has no uniform." But perhaps the most telling moment came at noon, when Jonas walked through the company cafeteria, not in his executive suit, but in casual clothes, sitting not at the executive table, but with the facilities staff. He listened to their ideas, their concerns, their dreams that had been deferred for too long. "Mr. Harvey," one of them asked, "is it true what they're saying, that you pretended to be a janitor to catch Mr. Connell?" Jonas smiled. "I didn't pretend to be anything. For 3 hours this morning I was a janitor, and in those 3 hours I learned more about this company's problems than 5 years of reports could have taught me." "But why?" another asked. "You're worth billions. Why would you lower yourself?" "Stop right there," Jonas interrupted gently. "I didn't lower myself. There's no shame in honest work, whatever that work might be. The only shame is in treating people as less than human because of the work they do." He stood addressing the entire cafeteria that had gone quiet to listen. "Every person in this building contributes to Pinnacle's success. The code that runs our systems is important, yes, but so is the clean environment that allows people to focus, the security that keeps us safe, the food that fuels our bodies. We're not a hierarchy here, we're an ecosystem. And ecosystems die when you poison any part of them." The applause started slowly from a table of junior developers, then spread through the cafeteria like wildfire. But Jonas wasn't done. "Starting tomorrow, we're implementing a new policy. Every executive, including myself, will spend 1 day per month working in a different department, not observing working, cleaning, cooking, maintaining. Because leadership that doesn't understand every aspect of the business isn't leadership at all." Richard Connell, meanwhile, was discovering just how thoroughly his world had collapsed. The FBI had frozen his accounts based on Jamal's evidence. The media had gotten hold of the discrimination lawsuits. His country club had already called to revoke his membership. And his wife, who tolerated his behavior for the sake of their social standing, had served him with divorce papers that her lawyer had apparently been preparing for months. He sat in his lawyer's office, still in the same suit he'd worn that morning, though now it was wrinkled and stained with the coffee he'd spilled on himself in rage. "There has to be something we can do," he insisted. "False imprisonment, wrongful termination, something." His lawyer, David Brennan, Thomas Brennan's brother, which Richard had thought would guarantee loyalty, shook his head. "Richard, they have you on tape using racial slurs. They have financial documents proving embezzlement. They have victims ready to violate their NDAs now that you're no longer in power to threaten them. My advice? Take whatever plea deal the DA offers, and pray it doesn't include jail time." "This is because of him, isn't it, Jonas Harvey? That sanctimonious—" "Stop," David said firmly. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. The FBI is recording everything now. Your only chance at avoiding federal prison is to show remorse." "Remorse?" Richard laughed bitterly. "For what? For making the company profitable, for maintaining standards, for stealing money and creating a hostile work environment that violated multiple federal laws," David replied coldly. "Richard, I've been your lawyer for 10 years, but I'm also a human being. The things on those recordings. How could you say those things?" Richard's face hardened. "Because they're true. Some people are meant to lead, and others are meant to serve," David finished. "Like Jonas Harvey, who built the company you just got fired from. Like Jamal Washington, who uncovered your fraud while you had him fetching coffee. Like all the brilliant people whose careers you destroyed because they didn't look like you." He stood up, gathering his files. "I'm withdrawing as your counsel. You'll need to find someone else to defend the indefensible." As his lawyer left, Richard sat alone in the office, the weight of his downfall finally beginning to sink in. But even then, he couldn't admit the truth that his prejudice had blinded him to talent, that his arrogance had made him vulnerable, that the janitor he'd dismissed had been playing chess while Richard hadn't even realized they were in a game. Back at Pinnacle Tech, the transformation was accelerating. Jonas had called an all-hands meeting for 3 p.m. Every employee from the executive suite to the night shift was invited. The main auditorium was packed with overflow rooms set up with video feeds. Jonas took the stage, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Diane Rodriguez, Jamal Washington, Miguel Santos, and a dozen other employees who'd been marginalized under Richard's regime. 43 years ago, Jonas began. I started this company with a simple belief that talent has no color, no gender, no predetermined packaging. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We confused privilege with merit, connections with capability. We built walls where we should have built bridges. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, every color, every age, every background that made America what it was. Today we tear down those walls, not with speeches or promises, but with actions. Effective immediately, we're implementing the most comprehensive diversity and inclusion program in Silicon Valley. Not because it's politically correct, but because it's smart business. Innovation comes from different perspectives, colliding not from echo chambers of sameness. The initiatives he outlined were revolutionary. Blind recruitment processes where names and photos were hidden until final interviews. Mentorship programs pairing senior staff with junior employees based on potential, not pedigree. A new venture fund specifically for startups founded by underrepresented entrepreneurs. But the most important change, Jonas said, is this. We're eliminating the executive floor. Leadership will be distributed throughout the building. My office will be on the second floor next to customer service, because leaders who isolate themselves from the people they serve inevitably lose touch with reality. The applause was thunderous, but Jonas raised his hand for quiet. I also want to address something directly. This morning I walked among you as a janitor. Some of you, he made eye contact with several employees, showed me kindness and respect. Others showed me who they really are when they think no one important is watching. To those in the latter category, I want you to know that I'm watching now. And more importantly, you should be watching yourselves. Because the measure of a person isn't how they treat their superiors, it's how they treat those they perceive as beneath them. He smiled, then the expression transforming his stern features. But I believe in redemption. Everyone gets a second chance to be better, to do better, to rise above the prejudices we've all inherited and create something new. That's what Pinnacle Tech is going to be, not just a tech company, but a model for what corporate America could become if we have the courage to change. The meeting ended with something unprecedented in corporate history. Jonas invited everyone to share their ideas, not through suggestion boxes or bureaucratic channels, but directly in town halls that would be held weekly. The janitor's insight would be weighted equally with the engineers. The receptionist's observation would be heard alongside the directors. As employees filed out, energized and hopeful, for the first time in years, Jonas noticed someone waiting by the stage. It was Samantha Chen, the executive assistant who'd questioned him that morning. I knew I recognized you, she said. My grandmother worked for you 20 years ago. You paid for her citizenship classes, helped her bring her family here from China. Mrs. Liu, Jonas remembered. She ran the cafeteria, made the best dumplings I've ever had. She still does every Sunday. She never forgot your kindness. She used to tell me, work for someone who sees people, not just employees. Samantha's eyes glistened. I'm sorry I didn't see you this morning. Really see you. You were polite, respectful. That's more than many managed. But I still saw the uniform, not the person. Jonas nodded. We all have biases, Samantha. The question is what we do once we recognize them. As the afternoon wore on, the ripple effects of the morning's events spread beyond Pinnacle Tech. Other Silicon Valley companies, nervous about their own hidden scandals, began conducting internal reviews. The hashtag #JanitorJustice started trending with service workers across the country, sharing stories of being dismissed, ignored, or worse by the executives they served. But Jonas wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. He was interested in creating change. That evening, as the sun set over the bay, he stood in his new office, deliberately modest, with windows facing the cubicles rather than the city, and made a series of phone calls. Margaret, he said to the board chair, I want to establish a fund, $50 million to start. for employees who were wrongfully terminated or demoted under Richard's leadership. Full back pay, restored positions if they want them, or seed money if they want to start their own ventures. The board will need to approve. The board will approve it, Jonas said firmly, or I'll fund it personally and make sure the press knows why it was necessary. His next call was to Harrison Westfield. Harrison, about that partnership. I have a condition. Westfield needs to undergo the same diversity audit we're conducting. Full transparency. If we're going to work together, we do it right. That's a big ask, Jonas. Yes, it is. The question is whether you're interested in real success or just the appearance of it. There was a long pause, then a chuckle. You know, I've been in business 40 years, and today's the first time I've seen someone gain power by pretending to lose it. All right, Jonas, full audit. But I want your team to lead it. Deal. As he ended the call, Diane knocked on the door. Jonas, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important. Behind her stood a young woman, maybe 25, wearing a food service uniform. Mr. Harvey, I'm Keisha Thompson. Marcus Thompson is my father. Jonas stood immediately. Marcus Thompson, the brilliant engineer, Richard had demoted to facilities management. Your father was one of the best minds I ever hired, Jonas said. What Richard did to him was criminal. It broke him, Keisha said quietly. He never recovered. Died 2 years ago believing he was worthless. Jonas felt the weight of her words, the price of his absence, his failure to protect his people. I'm sorry, he said. I should have been here. Should have stopped it sooner. You're here now, she replied. And I want you to know something. My father kept working on his designs even as a janitor, even when everyone told him to give up. He has 17 patents that were never filed because Richard made sure no one would look at them. She pulled out a worn notebook filled with intricate technical drawings. I want to file them, posthumously. Give him the credit he deserved. Jonas took the notebook carefully, reverently. We'll do more than that. We'll build them, every one, and the world will know that Marcus Thompson, the man Richard Connell thought was only fit to empty trash, was a genius. Keisha broke down, then years of grief and anger finally finding release. Jonas held her as she cried, this young woman who'd watched her father's light dim under the weight of systemic prejudice. We're going to name the new innovation lab after him, Jonas said. The Marcus Thompson Center for Inclusive Innovation. And you, if you're willing, are going to run it. But I'm just food service. No one is just anything, Jonas interrupted. Your father taught you, didn't he? You understand his work. She nodded. Then you're qualified. The only question is whether you're willing to help us make sure no one else goes through what your father did. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I am. As the day drew to a close, Jonas walked through the building one more time. But now, instead of avoiding eye contact as he had as a janitor, employees approached him. They shared ideas, concerns, dreams that had been suppressed for too long. By the time he reached the lobby, it was past 9 p.m. The night cleaning crew was arriving, and Jonas stopped to talk with each of them, learning their names, their stories, their aspirations. One was studying for the bar exam. Another was developing an app in his spare time. A third had a degree in biochemistry from Syria, but couldn't get it recognized in America. Things are going to change, Jonas promised them. Starting tomorrow, Pinnacle Tech is sponsoring a credential recognition program. We're going to help you use the degrees you earn, the knowledge you have. As he finally left the building, Jonas encountered one last person, Richard Connell, standing by an expensive car that was no longer his, as it was a company vehicle. Come to gloat? Richard asked bitterly. No, Jonas replied. Came to work. Something you never really understood the meaning of. I worked 80-hour weeks. You occupied a chair for 80 hours a week. There's a difference between being present and being productive, between having power and providing value. Richard's face twisted with rage. You think you've won. You think this changes anything. There are thousands of me in every boardroom in America." "I know," Jonas said sadly. "That's why what happened today isn't an ending. It's a beginning." He started to walk away, then paused. "Richard, you're going to lose everything. Your money, your reputation, probably your freedom. But you still have a choice. You can spend whatever time you have left bitter and hateful, or you can try to understand why what you did was wrong. Why treating people as less than human because of their race or position is not just morally bankrupt, but economically stupid. You're asking me to apologize for being successful. No, I'm asking you to apologize for preventing others from being successful, for confusing your privilege with superiority, for building your throne on the backs of people you wouldn't let stand." Richard said nothing. His jaw clenched, his eyes hard. Jonas sighed. "I didn't expect you to understand, but maybe someday, when you're doing whatever menial job you end up in to survive, when someone treats you as invisible, as worthless, as inherently inferior, maybe then you'll understand what you put others through." As Jonas walked to his car, the same modest Honda he'd driven that morning, refusing the luxury vehicle the board had offered, his phone rang. "Mr. Harvey." It was a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. "We're running a story about today's events. Do you have any comment about what this means for corporate America?" Jonas thought about the janitors still cleaning offices tonight, invisible to the executives working late. He thought about the brilliant minds dismissed because of accents or skin color. He thought about Marcus Thompson dying believing he was worthless, and his daughter ready to carry on his legacy. It means, Jonas said, that the revolution isn't just coming to corporate America. It arrived today wearing a janitor's uniform and carrying a mop, and it's going to clean house. The reporter pressed for more, but Jonas ended the call. He had work to do. Not the work of corporate politics or power plays, but the real work of building something better. Something that his 12-year-old self riding the bus to his segregated school could have been proud of. Something that proved the American dream wasn't just for people who looked a certain way or came from certain families. As he drove home through the streets of San Francisco, past the homeless encampments that Richard had complained about, ruining the view, past the immigrant communities that Richard had called problematic, past the public schools that Richard wouldn't send his children to, Jonas Harvey made a decision. Tomorrow he would return to Pinnacle Tech. But not as the triumphant founder or the vindicated CEO. He would return as Joe the janitor, one day, a month, every month, for as long as he ran the company. Because power that forgets where it came from is power that deserves to be lost. And in the boardroom that had seen so much drama that morning, a new sign was being installed where Richard's portrait had hung. It read simply, "The measure of a company is not its market cap or its profit margins. It is how it treats the person who empties its trash." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "In memory of Marcus Thompson, and all those whose brilliance was dimmed by prejudice, your light shines on." The transformation of Pinnacle Tech had begun. But more than that, a conversation had started in boardrooms and break rooms across America about who deserved to be heard, who deserved to lead, and whether the old guard's way of thinking could survive in a world that was finally slowly learning to see the janitor as clearly as the CEO. The next morning arrived with an unseasonable thunderstorm that turned San Francisco's streets into rivers of reflected neon. Jonas Harvey stood at his bathroom mirror at 4:30 a.m., but this time he wasn't putting on a janitor's uniform. He was preparing for war. "The shareholders' meeting is at 9. Marcus reminded him over the phone. "Richardson and his faction have been working all night. They're going to challenge your restructuring." Thomas Richardson, Richard Connell's mentor and the man who'd originally orchestrated Jonas's removal 5 years ago. He held 12% of Pinnacle's shares through various shell companies and had spent the night rallying every ally he could find. "Let them come," Jonas said, adjusting his tie. "I've been preparing for this for 5 years." But as he drove through the pre-dawn darkness, Jonas's phone exploded with notifications. Someone had leaked the security footage of him as a janitor to the media, but with a twisted narrative, Billionaire CEO deceives employees in elaborate manipulation scheme. The article clearly planted by Richardson's PR team painted Jonas as a megalomaniac who'd orchestrated elaborate theater to humiliate his opponents. They'd even found a psychologist to comment on the disturbing power dynamics of a billionaire pretending to be poor. Jonas pulled into Pinnacle's garage to find news vans already assembled. As he stepped out of his car, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Harvey, did you lie to your employees? Was this all just corporate theater? How do you respond to accusations that you manipulated vulnerable workers?" Jonas stopped, turned to face the cameras directly. "I spent 3 hours doing honest work while being treated as less than human. If that makes certain people uncomfortable, perhaps they should ask themselves why." Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Employees clustered in groups, some holding printed copies of the article, others watching news feeds on their phones. Jonas could feel their eyes on him. Some supportive, others newly suspicious. Diane Rodriguez met him at the elevator, her face grim. "Richardson's here. He's been in the boardroom since 5 a.m. with 6 other shareholders. They're claiming you've lost mental capacity, that the janitor stunt proves you're unfit to lead." "How many votes does he have?" "Enough to be dangerous, not enough to win. Unless..." She hesitated. "Unless what?" "Unless Victoria Walsh sides with him. She still holds her shares, and she's been in the building since midnight." The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors opened on the executive floor, Jonas found himself facing a gauntlet of Richardson's allies, men and women in $1,000 suits who'd never worked a day of physical labor in their lives. "Jonas!" Richardson's voice boomed from the boardroom doorway. At 78, he was still an imposing figure with the kind of old money bearing that came from 3 generations of wealth. "Quite the performance yesterday. Though I must say the janitor costume was a bit much even for you." "It wasn't a costume, Thomas. It was a uniform. One that deserved more respect than you've ever shown any worker in your life." Richardson's smile was cold. "Ah yes, the champion of the common man. Tell me, how much is your net worth again?" $5,600,000,000. Rather hypocritical, don't you think?" Before Jonas could respond, a commotion erupted from the stairwell. Jamal Washington burst through the door, laptop in hand, breathing hard from running up 20 flights. "Mr. Harvey, you need to see this, now." On the screen was a live feed from a Reddit forum where Pinnacle employees were sharing their stories. But these weren't complaints about Jonas's deception. They were testimonials from workers, janitors, food service security, describing how Jonas had treated them with dignity, even while in disguise, contrasting it with years of abuse under Richard and Richardson's regime. One post already viral with 50,000 upvotes was from Miguel Santos. "He looked me in the eye. First executive to do that in 15 years. I don't care if he was pretending to be a janitor. He saw me as a human being." Richardson's face darkened. "Social media gossip won't save your position, Jonas." "No," said a voice from behind them. "But this might." Victoria Walsh stood in the doorway holding a thick folder. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, but her eyes were clear and determined. "I've been here all night going through records," she said. "Not just from Richard's tenure, but from yours, Thomas. From the past 15 years. Richardson stiffened. "Those records are sealed." "Were sealed," Victoria corrected, "until someone with CEO access codes decided to unseal them. Did you know, Jonas, that Thomas Richardson personally blocked the promotions of 47 minority employees during his time on the board? That he maintained an illegal culture fit database that was essentially a blacklist of anyone who didn't look like him?" The boardroom erupted as Victoria began pulling out documents, each one meticulously annotated. Employment records, emails, memos that Richardson thought had been destroyed. "You kept copies," Richardson said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Richard kept copies," Victoria corrected. "Insurance, he called it. Hidden in an encrypted folder labeled leverage. He was paranoid about everyone, even you." She turned to Jonas. I spent 5 years as a coward watching injustice and doing nothing. But I'm done being silent. Thomas Richardson doesn't care about this company or its leadership. He cares about maintaining a system that benefits him and people who look like him. You little... Richardson started forward, but Jonas stepped between them. Careful, Thomas. You're being recorded. And unlike Richard, you're smart enough to know when you're beaten. But Richardson wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. You think you've won? I'm calling an emergency vote. Right now. All shareholders present or participating remotely. Within minutes, the boardroom was filling with shareholders, some in person, others joining via video link on the large screens. Richardson had clearly prepared for this, having his allies ready to join at a moment's notice. The motion before us, Richardson announced, seizing control of the meeting, is the immediate removal of Jonas Harvey as CEO due to mental instability and conduct unbecoming of corporate leadership. Second, called out one of his allies. Discussion, Richardson asked, barely pausing. No. Then we vote. Actually, Jonas said calmly, I believe shareholders should hear all relevant information before voting. He connected his laptop to the presentation system. The first slide showed Pinnacle's stock price up 12% since yesterday's news broke. The market approves of my actions, Jonas said. But more importantly, look at this. The next slide showed application numbers. In the past 24 hours, Pinnacle had received over 10,000 job applications, including dozens from top-tier engineers at competing firms. Talent is flowing to us because they want to work for a company that values human dignity, Jonas continued. But if you need more convincing... The boardroom doors opened again. Harrison Westfield entered, followed by 3 other CEOs Jonas recognized as major players in Silicon Valley. Gentlemen, ladies, Westfield addressed the room. We're here to announce that contingent on Jonas Harvey remaining as CEO, our 4 companies are prepared to sign exclusive partnership deals with Pinnacle worth approximately $8 billion over the next 5 years. Richardson's face had gone pale. This is manipulation. This is business. Westfield cut him off. We want to work with a company that reflects modern values, not prehistoric prejudices. Jonas Harvey proved yesterday that he understands something you never will. Richardson, that respect for workers isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The room fell silent. The financial implications were staggering. $8 billion in guaranteed revenue would make Pinnacle one of the most valuable companies in Silicon Valley. I call for the vote, Diane Rodriguez said firmly. All in favor of retaining Jonas Harvey as CEO. Hands rose throughout the room. On the screens, remote voters clicked their approval. The count was decisive, 73% in favor. Motion defeated, Margaret Chen announced with barely concealed satisfaction. Mr. Richardson, your services on this board are no longer required. Richardson stood slowly, his age showing for the first time. You're making a mistake. This social justice nonsense will destroy everything we built. No, Jonas said quietly. It will destroy everything you built. Everything you built on the backs of people you deemed inferior. And from those ashes, we'll build something better. As Richardson was leaving, he turned back one last time. You know what your problem is, Jonas? You actually believe that Janitor was your equal. No, Thomas, Jonas replied. My problem is that for 3 hours yesterday, he was my superior. He did honest work with dignity while being treated with contempt. That takes a strength you'll never understand. After Richardson's departure, the atmosphere in the boardroom shifted. The remaining shareholders, even those who'd been skeptical, began discussing implementation of Jonas's vision. But Jonas noticed Victoria Walsh slipping out quietly. He found her in her former office packing boxes. I meant my resignation, she said without looking up. I failed as a leader. You found your courage when it mattered most. 5 years too late. Jonas sat on the edge of her desk. Victoria, I need a chief operating officer who understands both the old system and why it needs to change. Someone who's learned from their mistakes. She finally looked at him, tears in her eyes. Why would you trust me? Because you've been where Richardson is now, and you chose to change. That's the kind of leader Pinnacle needs, not perfect people, but people committed to becoming better. Meanwhile, 3 floors down, a different drama was unfolding. The janitorial staff had called their own meeting, and to everyone's surprise, they'd invited the entire executive team to attend. Jonas arrived to find the cafeteria transformed. The janitor's food service workers, security guards, and maintenance staff sat on one side. The executives, looking deeply uncomfortable, sat on the other. Miguel Santos stood at the front. Mr. Harvey asked us to share our ideas. Well, we've been talking, and we have something bigger than ideas. We have demands. A murmur ran through the executives. Demands from the service staff, unheard of. Miguel continued. First, we want representation on the board, not token representation of voting member elected by the service staff. That's highly irregular, one executive started. So is a CEO pretending to be a janitor, Miguel shot back. But it worked, didn't it? He pulled out a presentation they'd prepared. It was sophisticated, thorough, and clearly the work of intelligent minds that had been systematically overlooked. Second, we want Pinnacle to establish a program where service workers can pitch their ideas directly to development teams. Marcus Thompson had 17 patents worth of ideas. How many more are we missing because you don't listen to the people who clean your offices? The presentation continued. Workplace improvements that would cost little, but mean everything. Efficiency. Innovations that only people doing the actual work would notice. And a revolutionary proposal for a subsidiary company, run entirely by current and former service workers to provide tech solutions for the service industry. This is remarkable, breathed one of the senior engineers. The efficiency algorithm alone could save us millions. We know, said one of the janitors, a woman named Maria who'd been silent until now. We've known for years. We just never had anyone willing to listen. Jonas stood. Motion to accept all proposals from the service staff. Do I have a second? Second, Victoria said, immediately surprising everyone by being there. All in favor. Every hand rose, some more slowly than others, but all rose. As the meeting broke up, Jonas overheard one executive say to another, I can't believe we're taking orders from janitors now. Jonas stopped him. No, you're taking suggestions from colleagues, and if you can't understand the difference, you're in the wrong company. The rest of the day blurred with activity. Press conferences, implementation meetings, and hundreds of emails from companies wanting to follow Pinnacle's model. But as evening fell, Jonas found himself alone in the boardroom where it had all started. Jamal knocked and entered. Mr. Harvey, there's something else you should know. About Richard Connell. Jonas looked up from the city lights. What about him? He's been arrested. But not just for embezzlement. The FBI found connections to something bigger. A whole network of executives across multiple companies systematically suppressing minority advancement. They called it Project Preserve. Jonas felt sick. How many companies? At least 40. Some of the biggest names in tech. Richard was just middle management in their hierarchy. The weight of it settled on Jonas's shoulders. Yesterday's victory suddenly seemed very small. Then we have more work to do, Jonas said quietly. Jonas smiled at the young analyst. You didn't think I brought you on just to catch Richard, did you? This is bigger than Pinnacle. We're going to expose all of it. That night, as Jonas finally headed home, he found someone waiting by his car in the garage. It was Keisha Thompson Marcus's daughter, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood dozens of people, young, old, various ethnicities, all holding candles. Mr. Harvey, Keisha said, these are the families, the ones who lost someone to the system, not physically but spiritually. Parents who watch their children's dreams die, children who watch their parents accept being treated as less than human. An elderly Asian woman stepped forward. My husband invented 3 of the processes Pinnacle still uses. Richardson took credit for all of them. My husband died thinking he was a failure. A young Latino man spoke next. My sister had a perfect GPA from MIT. Richard told her she was a diversity hire so many times she started believing it. She left tech entirely. Story after story, each a testament to dreams deferred and brilliance dimmed. Jonas listened to them all, memorizing faces, learning names. We're not asking for pity, Keisha said finally. We're asking for justice. Real justice. Not just money or apologies, but systematic change. You'll have it, Jonas promised. Every person who was wronged will be heard. Every innovation stolen will be credited. Every dream deferred will be given another chance. As the gathering dispersed, Jonas's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. You think you've won, but Project Preserve has roots deeper than you can imagine. Back off, or everyone you're trying to protect becomes a target. Jonas showed the message to Marcus, who'd been watching from nearby. They're scared, Marcus said. Good, Jonas replied. They should be. But as he drove home through the rain-slicked streets, Jonas knew the real battle was just beginning. Richardson was gone. Richard was arrested, but the system they represented had tentacles throughout corporate America. Project Preserve wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a philosophy, a belief system that had infected dozens of companies and thousands of minds. His phone rang. It was Margaret Chen. Jonas, we have a problem. 3 of our biggest clients are threatening to pull their contracts if we implement the service staff board position. They're calling it radical socialism. Let them go, Jonas said without hesitation. That's $300 million in annual revenue. And $8 billion in new partnerships waiting. Margaret, we either stand for something or we fall for everything. The board won't be happy. The board voted to support me. If they want to reverse that decision, they can call another vote. But I won't compromise on this. There was a pause. Then Margaret laughed. You know, in 40 years of corporate governance, this is the first time I've seen someone actually put principles before profit. No, Jonas corrected. I'm putting long-term profit before short-term gain. Companies that don't adapt to changing values don't survive. Ask Richardson how his worldview is working out for him. As he pulled into his driveway, Jonas saw a familiar figure waiting on his porch. It was the janitor from the night shift, an elderly Vietnamese man named Tuan, who'd barely spoken during the cafeteria meeting. Mr. Harvey, Tuan said in accented but clear English. I need to tell you something. About Project Preserve. Jonas invited him in, made tea, and listened as Tuan revealed what he'd overheard over years of being invisible in executive offices. They meet every quarter, Tuan explained. Different city each time. They have a whole system codes secret communications, even a fund to protect each other if anyone gets caught. How do you know all this? Tuan smiled sadly. Because I clean their meeting rooms. They discuss destroying people's careers while I empty their trash. They never thought the janitor could understand English, much less remember everything they said. He pulled out a notebook, pages filled with meticulous notes in Vietnamese and English. Dates, names, direct quotes. This is evidence of criminal conspiracy, Jonas breathed. Tuan, this could bring down half of Silicon Valley's old guard. That's why I give to you now, because you see me, you see us. For first time in 20 years, someone with power sees the invisible people. Jonas spent the next 3 hours documenting everything Tuan knew, recording his testimony, preparing what would become known as the invisible files, the evidence that would eventually expose Project Preserve and lead to the largest corporate discrimination lawsuit in American history. But that was still to come. Tonight, Jonas sat with Tuan, 2 men from different worlds united by a simple belief that dignity should not be a luxury reserved for the powerful. They won't go down without a fight, Tuan warned. They have resources, connections, ways to destroy lives. Then we'll have to be smarter, Jonas said. We'll use their greatest weakness against them. What weakness? Jonas smiled grimly. They still think we're inferior. They'll never see us coming, because they can't imagine losing to people they consider beneath them. As Tuan left, Jonas's phone buzzed with another message, this one from Diane. Emergency. Harrison Westfield just called. Someone's leaked that he's partnering with us. His board is in revolt. Project Preserve has members there too. Jonas called her immediately. How bad is it? They're calling an emergency vote tonight to remove him as CEO if he proceeds with the Pinnacle partnership. Jonas, if we lose Westfield's support, the other CEOs will buckle too. Then we don't lose him. Set up a video conference with his board, all of them. They won't listen to you. They will when they hear what I have to say. And Diane, make sure it's recorded. An hour later, Jonas faced a screen filled with hostile faces. Westfield's board of directors, 11 men and 1 woman, all radiating the kind of entitled fury that came from having their power challenged. Mr. Harvey, the board chairman began, your radical policies are a contagion that we won't allow to infect Westfield Industries. Interesting choice of words, Jonas replied calmly. Contagion, as if treating workers with dignity is a disease. It's economic suicide. Is it? Jonas pulled up Pinnacle's latest numbers. Our stock is up 18% in 48 hours. Job applications have increased by 3,000%. Customer satisfaction scores are the highest in company history. If this is suicide, it's the most profitable death in corporate history. Temporary market hysteria, or permanent market correction. Gentlemen and lady, let me be clear. The world is changing. Consumers, especially younger ones, are choosing companies based on values, not just products. Talent is flowing to companies that offer dignity, not just salaries. You can adapt, or you can become extinct like Richardson and his ilk. Richardson is Richardson is under federal investigation for civil rights violations, as are 40 other executives across Silicon Valley. I have the evidence, and it will be public soon. The question is, do you want to be on the right side of history or the wrong side of a perp walk? The board members exchanged nervous glances. One of them, younger than the others, spoke up. You're threatening us. I'm warning you. There's a difference. Project Preserve is finished. Everyone associated with it will be exposed. But those who choose change, who choose to embrace a new way of doing business, they'll be seen as pioneers, not pariahs. Harrison Westfield, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. Jonas has my full support, and if this board votes against the Pinnacle partnership, I'll take it as a vote of no confidence in my leadership and tender my resignation immediately. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. I've spent my career building value for shareholders. Now I want to build value for stakeholders, all of them, including the workers who actually create our products. The vote was close, 7-5, but Westfield survived. The partnership would proceed. As the conference ended, Jonas received a text from an unknown number. Impressive performance. But you've only seen the surface. Project Preserve goes deeper than you know. Federal judges, senators, regulators. You can't fight the entire system. Jonas typed back, watch me. But even as he projected confidence, Jonas knew the threat was real. Project Preserve wasn't just a corporate conspiracy. It was a network that reached into government media and law enforcement. Taking them on wouldn't just risk his company. It would risk everything. His phone rang. It was Jamal. Mr. Harvey, you need to see the news. Now. Jonas turned on the television to see his own face staring back at him. But it wasn't a business story. It was a personal one. Someone had leaked photos from his wife's funeral 5 years ago, showing him collapsed with grief being helped from the cemetery by Marcus. The headline was Cruel, Unstable CEO Harvey's History of Mental Breakdown Raises Questions About Fitness to Lead. The article went on to suggest that his wife's death had caused a psychological break, that the janitor disguise was a symptom of deeper mental illness, that he was a danger to Pinnacle's stability. Jonas felt rage building in his chest. Using Elena's death against him, turning his grief into a weapon, it was beyond corporate warfare. It was personal. His phone rang again. This time it was his daughter Sarah calling from Boston, where she was finishing her residency. "Dad, I'm seeing the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." "They're using Mom against you. How dare they?" "Because they're desperate. And desperate people do desperate things." "What are you going to do?" Jonas looked at the photo of Elena on his desk, taken just weeks before the cancer diagnosis. She was laughing, radiant, fully alive. "What your mother would do," he said quietly. "Fight for what's right no matter the cost." After Sarah hung up, Jonas sat in the darkness of his office, planning his next move. Project Preserve had made a crucial mistake. They'd made it personal. And while Jonas Harvey, the CEO, had to follow corporate rules, Jonas Harvey, the human being, had no such constraints. He picked up his phone and made a call he'd hoped never to make. "William? It's Jonas. Yes, I know what time it is. Listen, remember that favor you owe me from 1987? I'm calling it in." William Chen was now the Attorney General of California, and he was about to receive a package of evidence that would trigger the largest corporate fraud investigation in state history. As Jonas prepared the files for William, Diane knocked and entered. "The senior staff is here. They want to know how we respond to the mental health attacks." "We don't," Jonas said. "We let them think they've won this round. While they're celebrating, we'll be documenting everything. Every leak, every source, every connection. They're showing us their entire network. That's a dangerous game. The only one worth playing. Diane, I want you to reach out to every person Project Preserve has hurt over the years. Every suppressed minority, every buried complaint, every stolen innovation. Tell them their time has come." As the night wore on, Pinnacle Tech transformed into a war room. Employees who'd gone home came back working through the night to build what would become known as the Truth Database, a comprehensive record of systematic discrimination across Silicon Valley. But in the midst of all this, Jonas noticed something beautiful happening. The artificial barriers between departments were dissolving. Engineers worked alongside janitors, executives strategized with security guards, and for the first time in Pinnacle's history, the company felt truly united. At 3 a.m., as Jonas walked through the building, he found Miguel Santos teaching a group of young engineers about an efficiency algorithm he'd developed while mopping floors. "You see," Miguel was explaining, "when you clean the same route every night, you start seeing patterns. Traffic flows, usage peaks, energy waste. The building talks to you if you listen." One of the engineers, a kid fresh from Stanford, was taking notes furiously. "This is brilliant. Why didn't anyone ask for your input before?" Miguel smiled sadly. "Who asks the janitor about system optimization?" "We do now," the engineer said firmly. "We do now." As dawn approached, Jonas stood on the roof of Pinnacle Tech, looking out at Silicon Valley as it slowly woke. Somewhere out there, the members of Project Preserve were planning their next attack. They had money-power connections he could only imagine. But Jonas had something they didn't: the unleashed potential of thousands of brilliant minds they'd dismissed and ignored, and that he knew would make all the difference. His phone buzzed with a message from Keisha Thompson. "The families are with you, all of us. We're not invisible anymore." Jonas smiled, remembering something Elena had told him during her final days. The powerful only stay powerful as long as the powerless believe they are. The revolution had begun, and it had started with a mop and a bucket wielded by a billionaire who remembered what it meant to be human. The morning brought no respite. Jonas had barely slept 2 hours when his phone erupted with calls. William Chen, the Attorney General, was on the line before the sun had fully risen. "Jonas, the files you sent. Jesus Christ. This goes all the way to Washington. I've got senators' names in here, federal judges, SEC commissioners. Are you absolutely certain about this?" "Every word is documented, William. Tuan's recordings, the financial trails, the testimonies. It's all there. You realize what you're asking me to do? This isn't just taking down a few bad executives. This is declaring war on the entire power structure of corporate America. Jonas stood at his window watching the early morning joggers on the streets below, people living their lives unaware of the battle being waged in the towers above them. Then it's a war worth fighting. I'll need more than recordings from a janitor. No offense to Mr. Tuan, but defense lawyers will tear him apart. You'll have it. Give me 48 hours. After William hung up, Jonas found Diane waiting in his office with coffee and a grim expression. We have a problem. 3 of our board members received visits last night, personal visits, from men they described as professionally threatening. Project Preserve is getting desperate. What did these visitors want? Your resignation, by noon today. Or they release something they claim will destroy, not just you, but everyone who supports you. Jonas took the coffee, his mind racing. Any idea what they have? No, but Margaret Chen is terrified. She said they knew things about her family, her grandchildren's schools, their schedules. The implications were chilling. This wasn't corporate warfare anymore. It was something darker. Jonas picked up his phone and called Marcus. I need you to arrange security for all board members' families immediately. Discreet but thorough. Already on it, Marcus replied. But Jonas, there's something else. Richard Connell wants to meet. He says he has information about Project Preserve that you need to hear. Richard was being held in the Federal Detention Center pending trial. Jonas arrived to find him in an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from his $10,000 suits. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something Jonas hadn't expected: fear. They're going to kill me, Richard said without preamble. Who? Project Preserve, the real power behind it. I was middle management Jonas, a useful idiot who thought he was a player. Richard laughed bitterly. Do you know who really runs it? Jonas leaned forward. Tell me. Senator James Crawford, the man being groomed for the next presidential run. He's built an entire shadow network: judges who ensure discrimination lawsuits fail, regulators who look the other way, congressmen who kill diversity legislation before it can breathe. Why should I believe you? Richard pulled up his sleeve, revealing deep bruises. Because they already tried once, made it look like a suicide attempt. The guard saved me, but next time... He trailed off, then looked Jonas directly in the eyes. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about the people I dismissed and degraded. I see that now. Your convenient conversion doesn't absolve you. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm asking for protection. In exchange, I'll testify. About all of it. I have recordings, documents, proof of Crawford's involvement. Jonas studied his former adversary. Where are these documents? Safety deposit box. Bank of America, Mission Street branch. Box 447. Richard slid a key across the table. Everything's there, including something about your wife. Jonas froze. What about Elena? Her death wasn't random bad luck, Jonas. The cancer was real, but the treatment she was denied, the experimental drug trial she couldn't get into, Crawford made sure of that. You were getting too powerful, too influential. They wanted you broken. The room seemed to spin. Jonas gripped the table, rage and grief warring in his chest. You're lying. The proof is in the box. Medical records, emails, recordings of Crawford discussing how your wife's death would neutralize you as a threat. Richard's voice dropped. I didn't know at the time, I swear. I only found out later when they thought I was fully one of them. Jonas stood abruptly, the key burning in his palm. As he reached the door, Richard called out. They're planning something for noon today. Something big. Don't be at Pinnacle when it happens. Outside, Jonas called Marcus immediately. Evacuate the building. Gas leak maintenance. I don't care what excuse you use. Everyone out by 11:30. What's happening? I don't know yet, but we're not taking chances. The bank was nearly empty when Jonas arrived with Diane and Jamal. The safety deposit box contained everything Richard had promised, and more. Financial records showing bribes to judges, blackmail material on politicians, and a file marked E. Harvey, Operation Widower. Jonas's hands shook as he opened it. Inside were medical documents, emails between Crawford and the head of the drug trial discussing how to exclude Elena while making it appear procedural. The final email, dated 2 weeks before Elena's death, read, "Harvey will be too grief-stricken to fight us. Men like him always break when they lose their anchors." "My God," Diane whispered. "They murdered her. Maybe not directly, but they murdered her." Jonas said nothing, carefully photographing each document. The grief he'd carried for 5 years crystallized into something harder, sharper. This wasn't about corporate reform anymore. This was about justice for Elena. At 11:45, as the last Pinnacle employees evacuated the building, Jonas stood across the street with his core team. At exactly noon, nothing happened. No explosion, no attack, nothing visible. Then Diane's phone rang. Her face went white as she listened. "The SEC just froze all of Pinnacle's assets. They're claiming massive securities fraud based on anonymous whistleblower testimony. Jonas, they're saying you manipulated stock prices with the janitor stunt." Before Jonas could respond, FBI vehicles surrounded them. Agents emerged, weapons drawn, but not aimed. The lead agent, a woman Jonas recognized from newspaper photos as Special Agent Sarah Kim, approached with handcuffs. "Jonas Harvey, you're under arrest for securities fraud, market manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud investors." "This is Crawford's doing," Jonas said calmly as the handcuffs clicked shut. "Senator Crawford is a respected... Senator Crawford is a criminal who orchestrated my wife's death." Jonas's voice carried across the street where news cameras were already rolling. "And I have proof." Agent Kim hesitated, studying Jonas's face. Something in his eyes must have convinced her, because she leaned closer. "Say that again, louder." Jonas raised his voice, ensuring every camera and microphone caught his words. "Senator James Crawford deliberately blocked my wife's access to life-saving treatment to neutralize me as a business threat. I have documented proof, and I'm willing to testify before Congress." The arrest proceeded, but Jonas saw Agent Kim whisper urgently into her radio. As he was led to the FBI vehicle, he noticed Jamal and Diane weren't being arrested. Good. They needed to stay free to continue the fight. The federal courthouse was a media circus. Jonas was processed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. But within an hour, his lawyer arrived, not the corporate attorney he'd expected, but Samantha Liu, the granddaughter of the woman who'd run Pinnacle's cafeteria 20 years ago. "Ms. Liu," Jonas said, surprised. "I'm a federal prosecutor, Mr. Harvey. Or I was until an hour ago, when I recused myself from your case and took emergency leave." She smiled grimly. "My grandmother called. Said the man who helped our family needed help, so here I am." "I can't ask you to risk your career." "You're not asking. I'm volunteering. Now let's discuss strategy. The charges are obviously fabricated, but they're designed to hold up just long enough to destroy you publicly. We need to flip this narrative immediately." She pulled out a tablet showing social media feeds. The hashtag #JusticeForElena was already trending, with thousands sharing stories of loved ones denied medical treatment for profit or political reasons. "The public is with you," Samantha said. "But Crawford has judges in his pocket. We need something explosive to break through." Jonas thought of Richard in his cell, terrified and broken. "Get Richard Connell into protective custody, federal witness protection. He's ready to testify against Crawford." "That's a big ask." "Tell them he has proof of congressional corruption going back 15 years. They'll listen." As Samantha left to make arrangements, Jonas was transported to his arraignment. The courthouse steps were packed with protesters, but not the kind he'd expected. These were Pinnacle employees, janitors, engineers, executives, standing together holding signs, "Free Jonas Harvey" and "Justice for Elena." Miguel Santos stood at the front leading chants. When he saw Jonas, he raised his fist in solidarity. The gesture spread through the crowd, hundreds of fists raised in support of the man who'd mopped floors beside them. Inside the courtroom, Jonas recognized the judge immediately. Harold Patterson, one of Crawford's golf buddies, according to Richard's documents. This wouldn't be fair, but it would be public. Your Honor, the federal prosecutor began, the defendant engaged in elaborate corporate theater designed to manipulate stock prices. Objection, Samantha interrupted. The prosecution is editorializing. Mr. Harvey engaged in undercover management review, a legitimate business practice. Sustained, Judge Patterson said, reluctantly aware of the media presence. The bail hearing proceeded with the prosecution painting Jonas as a flight risk with billions in hidden assets. Samantha countered by revealing Jonas had already pledged his entire fortune to a trust for Pinnacle employees if convicted. Your Honor, Samantha said, my client isn't running anywhere. He's standing to fight not just for himself, but for every person who's been crushed by the system Senator Crawford represents. Objection? The prosecutor shot up. Senator Crawford isn't on trial here. No, but he should be, Jonas said, standing despite the bailiff's attempt to stop him. Your Honor, I have evidence that Senator Crawford orchestrated my wife's death by denying her medical treatment. I have evidence he's behind Project Preserve, a criminal conspiracy to suppress minority advancement across corporate America. And I have evidence that this arrest is his attempt to silence me. The courtroom erupted. Judge Patterson hammered his gavel, threatening contempt, but the damage was done. Every word was being broadcast live. Mr. Harvey, you're in contempt. Your Honor, a new voice interrupted from the gallery. Attorney General William Chen entered, flanked by FBI agents, including Agent Kim. I'm invoking federal jurisdiction over this case. Mr. Harvey is now a protected witness in a federal investigation into Senator Crawford and Project Preserve. Patterson's face cycled through several shades of red. You can't just... I can and I am. Agent Kim, please remove Mr. Harvey's restraints. He's coming with us. As the handcuffs were removed, Crawford himself burst into the courtroom, his perfect political smile nowhere to be seen. This is persecution, Crawford shouted. Harvey is a mentally unstable man, using his wealth to destroy anyone who opposes him. Jonas turned to face the man who'd orchestrated Elena's death. The rage he'd expected to feel was absent, replaced by something colder. Senator Crawford, Jonas said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. You killed my wife to stop me, but you failed to understand something fundamental about grief. It doesn't break everyone. Sometimes it forges them into something you can't destroy. You can't prove anything. Richard Connell is in federal protection, ready to testify. Tuan Nguyen has recordings of your meetings, and I have this. Jonas pulled out his phone, playing an audio recording. Crawford's voice filled the courtroom. Elena Harvey's death will neutralize him. Men like that, they need their women to function. Without her, he'll crumble. The courtroom erupted again, but Jonas wasn't done. He turned to the cameras. For 5 years, I blamed myself for not saving her, for not fighting harder, not finding better doctors, not being enough. But it wasn't my failure. It was murdered by men who see human lives as chess pieces in their power games. Crawford lunged at Jonas, but FBI agents intercepted him. As they wrestled him to the ground, he screamed, "You don't understand. The system needs us. Without people like me maintaining order, everything collapses." "No," Jonas replied. "Without people like you, everything thrives." Crawford was arrested on federal conspiracy charges with more charges pending. As Jonas left the courthouse, he found thousands gathered in the plaza. Not just Pinnacle employees now, but people from across Silicon Valley, across industries. The invisible workforce had become visible. Keisha Thompson stood on the courthouse steps with a megaphone. They want us to believe we're powerless, that the system is too big, too entrenched. But look around you. When we stand together, when we refuse to be invisible, we are the system. The crowd roared approval. Jonas tried to slip away quietly, but Miguel Santos caught his arm. "Where are you going? This is your moment." "No," Jonas said. "This is our moment. I'm just one man who figured out what you all knew all along, that the people they ignore are the ones who really run everything." That evening, Jonas sat in a secure location with William Chen, reviewing the evidence against Project Preserve. The network was vast: 43 companies, 17 senators, 9 federal judges, countless bureaucrats and enforcers. "This will take years to prosecute," William said. "Some will disappear into the system. Then we keep fighting. We shine light into every corner until there's nowhere left for them to hide. You know they'll come after you. Not legally, Crawford's arrest will make that too risky. But personally, your family, your friends, your legacy." Jonas thought of Elena, of the life they'd planned, the children they'd never had the chance to raise together. "They already took everything that mattered. Now I'm returning the favor." His phone buzzed. Sarah, his daughter, was calling from Boston. "Dad, I just saw the news about Mom. Is it true?" "Yes, sweetheart." There was a long pause, then Sarah's voice came back stronger. "Then we finish what you started. I'm leaving my residency. I'm coming home." "Sarah, no. Your career." "My career means nothing if it's built in a system that murders people for profit. I'm a doctor, Dad. I took an oath to do no harm. It's time I honored it by fighting those who do." After she hung up, Jonas sat in the gathering darkness, feeling the weight of the war he'd started, but also feeling something else: hope. The invisible were rising, finding their voices, refusing to be dismissed anymore. Jamal knocked and entered, laptop in hand. "Jonas, you need to see this. Since Crawford's arrest, whistleblowers are coming forward everywhere. 17 companies have already announced emergency reforms. The Department of Justice is opening investigations into 80 more. And Pinnacle? Stock price is up 40%. The SEC unfroze our assets with an apology, and the board unanimously voted to make you permanent CEO with complete autonomy to reform corporate culture." Jonas smiled grimly. "Then we have work to do." Over the next weeks, Pinnacle Tech became the epicenter of a corporate revolution. The service staff board position was filled by Miguel Santos, who immediately proposed innovations that saved millions while improving working conditions. The Marcus Thompson Center for Inclusive Innovation launched with Keisha at the helm, producing 17 patents in its first month, all credited to the original inventors, many posthumously. But the real change was cultural. The executive floor was eliminated, with leadership scattered throughout the building. Jonas kept his promise, working as a janitor 1 day per month. But he wasn't alone. Every executive did the same, learning the business from the ground up. The day Richard Connell testified before Congress was electric. He sat in his orange jumpsuit, no longer the arrogant executive, but a broken man seeking redemption, and laid out the entire Project Preserve network. Names, dates, crimes, victims. The hearing room was silent, except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the whir of cameras. "I was racist," Richard said simply. "I believed that people who looked like me were inherently superior. I was wrong. The janitor I humiliated could analyze financial documents better than I could. The engineers I suppressed had innovations I couldn't dream of. My prejudice didn't just hurt them, it hurt the companies I claimed to be protecting." When asked why he was testifying, Richard looked directly at Jonas, who sat in the gallery. "Because someone I tried to destroy showed me mercy. Jonas Harvey could have let me die in that cell. Instead, he saved my life. If he can see humanity in someone like me, maybe there's hope for redemption." Senator Crawford's trial became the most watched legal proceeding in American history. The evidence was overwhelming: financial crimes, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to deny medical treatment for political gain. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in cheers. But Jonas didn't celebrate. He stood outside the courthouse thinking of Elena, of the life stolen from them. Victory didn't bring her back. It just meant her death hadn't been in vain. Victoria Walsh approached him, no longer the polished CEO, but a woman who'd found her purpose. "Jonas, the other companies want to know how we did it. How we transformed so quickly. Tell them the truth. We stopped seeing people as resources and started seeing them as human beings. We stopped confusing privilege with merit. We learned that the janitor's perspective is just as valuable as the CEO's. They won't believe it's that simple. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing in the world, admitting you were wrong and committing to do better. But it's also the only thing that works. As the months passed, the transformation rippled outward. Companies across America began implementing their own versions of Pinnacle's reforms. The term Harvey Doctrine entered business schools, the radical idea that every employee deserved dignity and opportunity regardless of their position. But there were still holdouts, companies clinging to the old ways. Jonas received death threats, assassination attempts were thwarted, and Project Preserve's remaining members fought back with lawsuits and propaganda. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tuan Nguyen, the janitor, whose testimony had helped expose everything, had been quietly documenting more than just meetings. He'd been recording the innovations, ideas, and brilliance of service workers across dozens of companies for 20 years. "Mr. Harvey," Tuan said, presenting Jonas with a box of notebooks. "Every janitor, every food service worker, every security guard with idea I wrote down. 300 notebooks, thousands of innovations. All ignored because of who suggested them." Jonas spent days going through the notebooks, finding solutions to problems companies had spent millions failing to solve. The answer had been there all along, in the minds of people they'd dismissed as unimportant. The announcement of the Invisible Innovations Initiative sent shockwaves through corporate America. Pinnacle would fund and develop every viable idea in Tuan's notebooks with full credit and profit sharing to the original inventors. Within 6 months, the initiative had generated $2 billion in revenue and created 300 new jobs. More importantly, it proved definitively that brilliance existed at every level of every company. It just needed to be recognized. The day Jonas returned to his janitor duties for his monthly shift, he found the building transformed. The rigid hierarchy was gone, replaced by collaborative spaces where engineers worked alongside maintenance staff, where executives ate lunch with security guards, where ideas flowed freely regardless of their source. Miguel Santos found him mopping the third-floor bathroom, a task Jonas insisted on doing properly despite his billions. "You know," Miguel said, "when you first showed up with that mop, I thought you were mocking us. And now I understand. You weren't pretending to be a janitor. You were remembering how to be human." That evening, Jonas stood on the roof of Pinnacle Tech, looking out at Silicon Valley. Many of the old guard were gone, arrested, disgraced, or reformed. In their place rose a new generation of leaders who understood that power without empathy was just tyranny with better PR. His phone rang. It was Sarah calling from the medical clinic she'd established for Pinnacle employees and their families. "Dad, I just wanted you to know, we got approval for the Elena Harvey Memorial Fund. Free healthcare for all service workers and their families nationwide." Jonas closed his eyes, feeling Elena's presence for the first time since her death. Not as grief, but as peace. "She would have loved that," he said. "She would have loved what you've become," Sarah replied. "Not the CEO who conquered corporate America, but the man who remembered that every person deserves dignity." As night fell over Silicon Valley, Jonas Harvey remained on the roof, a billionaire who'd learned the most valuable lesson of his life from a mop and bucket, that true power didn't come from standing above others, but from lifting them up beside you. The revolution he'd started with 3 hours as a janitor had become a movement that transformed American corporate culture. But for Jonas, the real victory was simpler. He could look in the mirror again and see not the man who'd failed to save his wife, but the man who'd honored her memory by saving thousands of others from the system that had killed her. The transformation of Pinnacle Tech had been remarkable, but Jonas knew the hardest battles often came after victory. 6 months after Crawford's conviction, he stood in his office reviewing a disturbing report from Diane Rodriguez. 3 of their reformed partner companies had quietly reverted to their old practices, hiring discrimination returning the moment public attention shifted elsewhere. They're calling it strategic restructuring. Diane said, her voice tight with anger. Laying off the diverse hires we fought for, replacing them with what they call culture fits. Jonas set down the report, his jaw clenched. Then we cut them off. Cancel all partnerships immediately. That's $12 billion in contracts, Jonas. The board will understand that principles aren't negotiable. He picked up his phone, but before he could dial, Marcus burst through the door. We have a serious problem. There's been an accident at the Thompson Innovation Center, an explosion in the lab. Keisha's been hurt. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Jonas's mind raced through possibilities: equipment failure, human error, or something more sinister. When they arrived at San Francisco General, they found the emergency room in chaos. Sarah was already there in her white coat, having rushed from the Pinnacle Clinic. Dad, she's stable but critical. Third-degree burns on her arms, smoke inhalation. She was working late on one of her father's designs when the explosion happened. Was anyone else hurt? 2 security guards who rushed in to pull her out. They're being treated for smoke inhalation. Jonas found the security guards Tommy Chen and Maria Rodriguez being given oxygen in the corridor. Both had risked their lives without hesitation for someone the old regime would have considered their superior. You saved her life, Jonas said simply. Tommy pulled off his oxygen mask. She's one of us, Mr. Harvey. We don't leave our people behind. The words hit Jonas hard. One of us. Not management versus labor, not executives versus security, just people protecting people. This was what they'd built, and someone had tried to destroy it. Detective Raymond Parker from SFPD arrived within the hour, his expression grim. Mr. Harvey, preliminary investigation suggests this wasn't an accident. We found traces of an accelerant, and the security footage from that section was mysteriously corrupted, starting an hour before the explosion. Someone tried to kill her. Or send a message. Ms. Thompson has been very vocal about prosecuting companies that stole her father's innovations. She's made enemies. Jonas felt the old rage building, but this time it was different. This wasn't about him or even Elena anymore. They'd targeted Keisha because she represented everything Project Preserve feared: a young black woman with power, brilliance, and the courage to use both. His phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a single message. This is what happens when the help forgets their place. Jonas showed it to Detective Parker, who immediately called for a trace. But Jonas knew they wouldn't find anything. Project Preserve's remnants had learned to hide better. In the ICU, Keisha was conscious but heavily bandaged. When she saw Jonas, she tried to smile through the pain medication haze. "Did we save the prototype?" were her first words. "Forget the prototype. You're alive. That's what matters." "No," she said, firmly gripping his hand with her unbandaged fingers. "They want us to forget the work, to be scared. The prototype was going to revolutionize clean energy. Dad designed it 15 years ago, but Richard buried it because it threatened his oil industry connections." Jonas understood. The attack wasn't just on Keisha. It was on Marcus Thompson's legacy, on every suppressed innovation they were trying to resurrect. "We'll rebuild it," he promised. "Every note, every design." "I memorized it," Keisha said, tapping her temple weakly. "They can burn the lab, but they can't burn what's in here." Over the next days, as Keisha recovered, something extraordinary happened. Engineers, janitors, secretaries, and executives began showing up at the hospital with notebooks, flash drives, and memories. Each had preserved pieces of innovations that had been suppressed over the years, a secret archive of brilliance that Project Preserve had tried to destroy. Miguel Santos brought designs for water purification systems he'd sketched while mopping floors near the engineering department. Tuan Nguyen had photocopies of patents that were filed but mysteriously disappeared. Even Victoria Walsh arrived with a box of documents she'd hidden during Richard's reign, knowing someday they'd be needed. "We all knew," Victoria said to Jonas. "We knew brilliant ideas were being buried, so we saved what we could. We were waiting for someone with the power and courage to bring them to light." Jonas stood in Keisha's hospital room, now converted into an impromptu innovation center, watching as decades of suppressed genius were reconstructed from the collective memory of Pinnacle's workforce. It was beautiful and heartbreaking. Simultaneously, so much progress delayed, so many lives diminished, all for the sake of maintaining a power structure built on lies. But the enemy wasn't finished. 3 days after the explosion, Jonas received a call from the federal prison where Richard Connell was being held. "Jonas, you need to know something." Richard's voice was shaky. "There's going to be another attack. Tonight. They're targeting the whole building this time." "How do you know?" "Because they approached me, wanted me to recant my testimony in exchange for protection. When I refused, they got chatty, thought I was still one of them deep down. Jonas, they have someone inside Pinnacle, high level, someone you trust." The line went dead. Jonas immediately called for a total evacuation of Pinnacle Tech, but he knew that wasn't enough. They needed to find the insider before more people were hurt. He gathered his core team in a secure location: Diane, Jamal, Miguel, Victoria, and Marcus. One of them, or someone close to them, was a traitor. "I don't suspect any of you," Jonas began, "but someone with high-level access is feeding information to what's left of Project Preserve. We need to find them before—" His phone rang. It was building security. They'd found something in the evacuation, dozens of devices throughout Pinnacle Tech, all set to detonate at midnight. "Everyone out?" Jonas asked. "Yes, sir. But Mr. Harvey, there's something else. We found who planted them. Security footage from a section they didn't know about caught them clearly." Jonas's blood ran cold. "Who?" "Margaret Chen, sir. The board chair." The room erupted in shocked voices. Margaret had been one of Jonas's strongest supporters, had voted against his removal 5 years ago, had stood by him through the Crawford investigation. It didn't make sense unless— "She's being blackmailed," Victoria said suddenly. "It's the only explanation. Margaret's grandson has special needs, requires constant medical care. If they threatened his treatment—" Jonas was already moving, calling Margaret's phone. When she answered, her voice was broken. "I'm sorry, Jonas. They have my grandson. If I don't do what they say, they'll cut off his medications, his therapy. He'll die." "Margaret, where are you?" "At the office. 38th floor. I'm supposed to ensure you're here when it happens. They want to make you a martyr, blame it on extremists, opposing corporate reform. I'm coming to get you. No, Jonas, they're watching. If you come—" "Margaret, do you trust me?" A pause. "Yes." "Then go to the boardroom. Barricade yourself in. I'm coming, and we're going to save your grandson." Jonas turned to his team. "This ends tonight. Marcus gets SWAT to Pinnacle. Diane, contact the FBI, tell them we have a kidnapping connected to domestic terrorism. Jamal, I need everything you can find on Margaret's grandson's medical providers. They're how Project Preserve is controlling her." "What are you going to do?" Victoria asked. "What I should have done from the beginning. Face them directly." Jonas entered Pinnacle Tech alone despite his team's protests. The building was eerily quiet. Emergency lights casting long shadows. He knew they were watching, whoever they were now. Crawford was in prison. Richardson was disgraced, but evil rarely died. It just changed faces. He found Margaret in the boardroom, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Jonas. I never wanted—" "I know." He pulled her into a hug. "We're going to fix this. How they have connections everywhere, even with Crawford gone. Because we have something they don't. We have thousands of people who've been invisible for too long, who see everything, who remember everything. And tonight, they're all watching." Jonas pulled out his phone, opening a live stream app. Within seconds, he was broadcasting to millions. The story had gone viral, and people worldwide were following the Pinnacle Tech revolution. This is Jonas Harvey, broadcasting from Pinnacle Tech, which is currently rigged with explosives by the remnants of Project Preserve. They want to kill me, frame it as extremist violence, and use my death to reverse everything we've fought for. The view count climbed exponentially, 10,000, 100,000, a million. But they made a mistake. They think power comes from fear, from control, from keeping people in their place. They're about to learn that real power comes from transparency, from courage, from refusing to be silenced. His phone rang. Unknown number. Jonas answered on speaker, ensuring the live stream caught everything. "Very dramatic, Mr. Harvey," a disguised voice said. "But you're still going to die tonight. You and the traitor Chen." "I don't think so. See, while you were focused on Margaret, my people were working. Jamal." Jamal's voice came through Jonas's earpiece, also broadcast to the stream. "Got them, Mr. Harvey. The grandson is safe. FBI and medical team extracted him from a warehouse in Oakland 10 minutes ago." Margaret collapsed with relief. The disguised voice turned venomous. "It doesn't matter. The bombs are still active. You have 15 minutes. "Actually," Marcus's voice interrupted. "Bomb squad disabled the last device 30 seconds ago. Building's clear." "Then we'll destroy you another way. Your reputation. Your company." "With what?" Jonas asked calmly. "Your network is broken. Crawford's in prison." Richardson's testimony exposed everyone, and right now, 2 million people are watching this live stream, seeing exactly who you are. Cowards hiding in shadows because you can't compete in the light. "You don't even know who I am." Jonas smiled coldly. "Actually, I do. The voice modulator is good, but not perfect." "Hello, Thomas." Silence. Thomas Brennan Richards' lawyer's brother, the board member who disappeared after the Crawford arrest. "You've been coordinating the remnants of Project Preserve, trying to rebuild from the shadows." On the live stream, viewers could see Jonas holding his phone toward the boardroom's panoramic windows. In the reflection, barely visible, was a figure on a building across the street, watching through a scope. "SWAT has you surrounded, Thomas. It's over." The live stream showed the dramatic arrest Thomas Brennan dragged from his sniper's perch, the rifle he'd planned to use to kill Jonas, and frame extremists kicked away by officers. But Jonas wasn't watching. He was holding Margaret Chen, who sobbed with relief that her grandson was safe. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "You protected your family. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone. Richard wouldn't have. Crawford wouldn't have. But you understand, because you lost family to these monsters." Jonas helped her stand. "We're going to need a new board chair. Someone with unquestionable integrity." "Miguel Santos," Margaret said immediately. "The janitor who became our conscience. He sees everything, forgets nothing, and can't be bought or intimidated." Jonas smiled. "I was thinking the same thing." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Thomas Brennan's arrest led to 17 more members of Project Preserve's remnants being identified and arrested. The live stream of Jonas confronting terrorism with transparency became the most watched video in internet history, inspiring similar movements worldwide. But the real victory came a week later, when Keisha Thompson walked back into the rebuilt Innovation Center, her arms still bandaged, but her spirit unbroken. "I've been thinking," she told Jonas. "They tried to kill me because I represent change, so let's give them more change than they can handle." She unveiled her plan, the Thompson Legacy Initiative. Every suppressed innovation, every buried patent, every silenced inventor would be honored. But more than that, Pinnacle would establish innovation centers in underserved communities nationwide, teaching kids that brilliance wasn't about pedigree, but persistence. "We're not just going to develop these innovations," Keisha announced at the press conference. "We're going to teach the next generation to create their own. Every child who's been told they don't belong in tech, every teenager who's been dismissed because of their zip code or skin color, we're coming for you, in a good way." The response was overwhelming. Applications flooded in from kids who'd never imagined they could work in technology. Schools in forgotten neighborhoods suddenly had state-of-the-art labs. The janitor's child learned alongside the senator's, and nobody cared who pushed a mop or who wore a suit. Jonas continued his monthly janitor shifts, but now he wasn't alone. It became a tradition. Executives, engineers. Everyone took turns in service roles, not as punishment or performance, but as reminder that every job had dignity and every person had potential. One evening, 6 months after Brennan's arrest, Jonas was mopping the lobby when a young black girl, maybe 12, approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir. Are you really Jonas Harvey?" "I am. And you are BT. Destiny Washington. Jamal's my uncle. He said you were the janitor who became the boss." "Actually, I was the boss who became a janitor. Then I learned being a janitor was more important." She looked confused. "How is mopping more important than running a company?" Jonas set down his mop, giving her his full attention. "Because when you're mopping, you see everything. You see the engineer who's struggling, the secretary who has brilliant ideas but no one to listen, the security guard who could solve problems executives can't even identify. Power isn't about sitting in the big office, it's about seeing people others ignore." "My mom says I could be an engineer someday." "Your mom's wrong," Jonas said, watching her face fall before continuing. "You could be an engineer today. Age doesn't determine ability. Want to see the innovation lab?" Her eyes lit up. As Jonas led her through Pinnacle Tech, showing her the laboratories where kids her age were already developing solutions to real problems, he thought about how far they'd come. The revolution that started with a mop and bucket had transformed not just Pinnacle or Silicon Valley, but the entire concept of corporate hierarchy. Companies worldwide were adopting what business schools now called the Harvey model leadership through service innovation, through inclusion power, through empowerment. But Jonas knew the work wasn't finished. There would always be those who believed in superiority based on circumstance rather than character, who saw diversity as threat rather than strength. The Thomas Brennans and Crawford disciples were still out there, waiting for complacency to set in. That's why Jonas kept mopping. Every month he reminded himself and everyone watching that dignity didn't come from titles or salaries, but from recognizing the humanity in every person you met. As Destiny worked with Keisha on a simple circuit board, her face glowing with discovery, Jonas received a text from Sarah. "Dad, the Elena Harvey Medical Centers just treated their millionth patient. Free healthcare for service workers nationwide. Mom would be so proud." Jonas looked at the photo Sarah had attached, a wall of pictures showing families who'd received life-saving treatment they couldn't otherwise afford. At the center was Elena's portrait, smiling that radiant smile that had first captured his heart 45 years ago. "She knows," he whispered. Jamal appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Harvey, there's been a development. Several Fortune 500 companies are forming what they're calling the Traditional Values Alliance. They're positioning it as preserving business culture, but it's Project Preserve under a new name," Jonas finished. "Different faces, same hatred." "What do we do?" Jonas looked at Destiny, now confidently explaining her circuit design to Keisha. He thought of all the Destinies out there, all the Marcus Thompsons whose brilliance had been buried, all the Miguel Santoses whose innovations had been ignored. "We do what we've always done. We fight, we expose, we transform, and we never ever stop." The battle for corporate soul wasn't won in boardrooms or courthouses. It was won in moments like this, a billionaire teaching a child that her dreams were valid, a janitor's daughter running an innovation lab, a security guard's ideas being implemented company-wide. 3 years had passed since Jonas Harvey walked into Pinnacle Tech wearing a janitor's uniform. In that time, the company had become the most valuable in Silicon Valley, not despite its inclusive policies, but because of them. The stock price had quadrupled, patents had increased by 300%, and employee satisfaction was the highest in the industry. But more importantly, Pinnacle had become a symbol. When marginalized employees at other companies faced discrimination, they didn't suffer in silence anymore. They stood up and said, "Remember Jonas Harvey. Remember what one person with courage can do." The Traditional Values Alliance tried to paint Jonas as a radical, a threat to American business. They funded attack ads, hired protesters, even attempted to challenge Pinnacle's hiring practices in court. Each attack failed because Jonas had something they didn't: the truth, transparency, and the support of millions who'd been invisible for too long. Richard Connell, now 3 years into his sentence, sent Jonas a letter. I spent my entire life believing I was superior because of my birth, my race, my connections. You destroyed that illusion in 3 hours. I hated you for it. But now, sitting in this cell, forced to confront who I really was, I understand. You didn't destroy me, you saved me from myself. I was drowning in hatred. I'd been taught was natural, suffocating, and privilege. I'd been told was deserved. Thank you for showing me I was wrong. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, but I can spend whatever time I have left trying to be better. Jonas read the letter twice, then had it framed and hung in the lobby of Pinnacle Tech next to the photos of all the employees beneath the inscription about innovation having no uniform. Victoria Walsh, who'd found her courage and kept it, now ran a nonprofit teaching other executives how to transform their corporate cultures. She often told the story of the morning she'd watched Jonas as a janitor being humiliated by Richard. I knew it was wrong, she'd say. But I was a coward, more afraid of losing my position than standing for what was right. That cowardice cost lives, destroyed careers, perpetuated suffering. Never again. Miguel Santos, now board chair, instituted a policy that would have been unthinkable in the old days. Any employee, regardless of position, could call for a vote of no confidence in leadership if they witnessed discrimination or abuse. The janitor could fire the CEO if necessary. Power corrupts, Miguel explained, unless power is shared. When everyone has the ability to check, abuse becomes impossible. The Traditional Values Alliance called it mob rule and the death of leadership. But companies that adopted similar policies saw productivity soar and turnover plummet. Turns out, people worked harder when they knew their voices mattered. On a warm September evening, exactly 3 years after his morning as a janitor, Jonas stood on Pinnacle Tech's roof. The city sprawled below, lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Beside him stood an unexpected guest, Harrison Westfield. You know they're planning something, Westfield said. The Alliance let them plan. Every scheme they devise just exposes them further. This is different, Jonas. They're targeting the children. Jonas turned sharply. What do you mean? The innovation centers in underserved communities. They're planning to challenge their funding claim it's discriminatory against white children. They've got judges ready to rule in their favor. Then we'll fund them privately. All 200 centers. That's billions. I have billions. And if I run out, I'll get more. Those children are the future Harrison. They're the Keishas and Jamals who'll transform the world if given the chance. Westfield studied him. You really believe that, don't you? That talent is equally distributed? I know it is. I've seen it. The only thing that's unequally distributed is opportunity. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Westfield spoke again. I'm 73 years old. I've been in business for 50 years. For 49 of them, I believed what Richardson and Crawford believed, that people like us were naturally superior. Then I watched you as a janitor diagnose financial fraud in seconds that my CFO had missed for months. That was my road to Damascus moment. And now I want to help. The Westfield Foundation has $8 billion in assets. I want to put it all toward ensuring those innovation centers can never be closed. Jonas extended his hand, and Westfield shook it firmly. As Westfield left, Jonas remained on the roof. His phone buzzed with a message from Destiny Washington, the girl he'd met while mopping. She'd just won a national science fair with an innovation that would reduce water waste by 30%. Thank you for showing me I belonged, her message read. Jonas smiled, thinking of Elena. She'd always said his purpose was bigger than business, that he was meant to open doors others had closed. He'd failed to save her from Project Preserve's cruelty, but he could save others from the system that had killed her. The war wasn't over. The Traditional Values Alliance and its ilk would keep fighting, keep trying to preserve a hierarchy built on hate. But they were fighting history now, swimming against a tide that had already turned. Every janitor who shared their innovation, every child who learned they belonged in tech, every executive who spent a day mopping floors, they were all part of the revolution. And revolutions once started were impossible to stop. Jonas picked up his phone and sent a message to his team. Tomorrow we expand. Every company that partners with the Traditional Values Alliance gets a visit from our innovation teams. We'll show their employees what they're missing by excluding brilliance based on prejudice. Diane responded immediately. That's declaring war on half of corporate America. No, Jonas typed back. It's declaring peace. War is what they've been waging on the invisible for generations. We're just making the invisible seen. The next morning arrived with an unexpected visitor at Jonas's home. He opened the door to find an elderly white woman impeccably dressed but with trembling hands. She looked familiar, though Jonas couldn't immediately place her. Mr. Harvey, my name is Eleanor Crawford. I'm James Crawford's mother. Jonas's body tensed, his hand still on the door. The senator who'd orchestrated Elena's death, now serving life in federal prison, this was his mother. May I come in? She asked, her voice steady, despite her obvious fear. I have information you need to hear. Against his better judgment, Jonas let her in. She sat in his living room, the same room where he'd grieved Elena, where he'd planned the revolution that destroyed her son's empire. My son was evil, Eleanor said without preamble. I know that. I raised him better, or thought I did, but somewhere along the way he became a monster. I'm not here to apologize for him. Some things are beyond apology. Then why are you here? She pulled out a leather journal worn with age. Because his evil didn't die with his imprisonment. The Traditional Values Alliance isn't just inspired by Project Preserve. It is Project Preserve restructured and refined. And they have something planned that will destroy everything you've built. Jonas leaned forward. What kind of plan? They're going to kill someone, a child, one of the students at your innovation centers. They'll make it look like an accident caused by dangerous equipment you provided, then use that tragedy to shut down every center lawsuit by lawsuit. The room seemed to spin. Jonas gripped the arm of his chair. Which center? Which child? I don't know specifics, but I know it's happening within the week. My son still has followers, Mr. Harvey. Prison doesn't stop a man like James from spreading poison. Why tell me this? Why betray your own son? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Because I've spent 3 years visiting him, hoping to see remorse. Instead, I see only deeper hatred. He laughs about your wife's death, Mr. Harvey. Laughs. My own son has become something I don't recognize, and I won't let him murder another innocent. She stood to leave, then turned back. There's one more thing. The Traditional Values Alliance has someone inside your innovation centers. A teacher or administrator, someone parents trust. That's how they'll make it look like an accident. After Eleanor left, Jonas immediately convened an emergency meeting. Within hours, security protocols at all 200 innovation centers were under review. But with thousands of employees and volunteers, finding one potential murderer was like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. Keisha Thompson took charge of the investigation, her analytical mind perfect for pattern recognition. We need to look for recent hires, anyone who came on after the alliance formed. Also anyone with connections to the old Project Preserve network. That's still hundreds of people, Jamal pointed out. Then we work faster, Jonas said. We have maybe 6 days to prevent a child's murder. The next 72 hours were a blur of background checks, surveillance reviews, and quiet investigations. Jonas barely slept, haunted by the thought of failing another innocent the way he'd failed Elena. On the 4th day, Destiny Washington made the breakthrough. The 12-year-old had been helping review personnel files when she noticed something others had missed. Mr. Harvey, look at this teacher David Steinberg at the Oakland Center. His resume says he taught at Jefferson Elementary for 5 years, but my cousin went there. They never had a teacher named Steinberg. Jonas immediately had Marcus investigate. Within hours, they'd uncovered the truth. David Steinberg was actually Daniel Brennan, Thomas Brennan's son, hired under a false identity 6 months ago. He'd been specifically assigned to work with the most talented students, the ones whose deaths would make the biggest media impact. We need to arrest him immediately, Marcus said. No. Jonas replied, his mind working through possibilities. If we arrest him, they'll just activate another asset, one we haven't found. We need to catch them all. He turned to Keisha. Can you create a fake emergency that would evacuate the Oakland Center without raising suspicion? Gas leak, power failure. Something that would require moving the students but not cancel their activities. We want Daniel to think his plan can still proceed. Keisha's eyes lit up with understanding. Field trip. We announce a surprise visit to Pinnacle Tech headquarters for the advanced students, the ones he'd most likely target. Do it! The next morning, 3 buses of excited students arrived at Pinnacle Tech, including all of Daniel Brennan's potential victims. Brennan himself came along, unable to refuse without raising suspicion. Jonas watched from security monitors as the man who'd planned to murder children walked through Pinnacle's halls, unaware that FBI agents were tracking his every move. At lunch, Jonas made his move. He entered the cafeteria where the students were eating, but instead of addressing them, he walked directly to Daniel Brennan. Hello, Daniel. Or should I say David? It's hard to keep track of the lies, isn't it? Brennan's face went white, but he tried to maintain composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Your father is Thomas Brennan. Your real name is Daniel. You're here to murder one of these children to destroy my innovation centers. Jonas's voice was calm, conversational, but every word carried lethal certainty. The only question is whether you'll confess now and maybe see daylight again, or whether you'll resist and spend your life in a cell next to Senator Crawford. The cafeteria had gone silent. Students and teachers watched in shock as their colleague was exposed. Daniel looked around wildly, perhaps calculating escape routes, but FBI agents had already sealed the exits. You can't prove anything. Jonas pulled out his phone, playing a recording from Daniel's apartment, captured by warrant the night before. Daniel's voice filled the cafeteria. The Washington girl would be perfect. Brilliant, black, sympathetic. Her death would destroy Harvey and generate maximum media coverage. Destiny Washington, sitting just 3 tables away, gasped in horror. Her uncle Jamal immediately moved to comfort her, but the girl's eyes stayed fixed on Jonas. You were going to kill me, she asked Daniel, her young voice carrying impossible strength. Why, what did I ever do to you? Daniel's composure finally cracked. You don't belong here. None of you do. This technology, these opportunities, they should be for people like you, Jonas interrupted. White privileged and so insecure about your own mediocrity that the only way you can feel superior is by destroying those with actual talent. My father was right about you, Daniel snarled as FBI agents cuffed him. You're destroying the natural order. The natural order. Destiny stood up, all 12 years of her radiating dignity. The natural order is that talent exists everywhere. You're just mad because when everyone gets a chance, people like you don't automatically win anymore. The cafeteria erupted in applause as Daniel was led away. But Jonas knew this victory, like the others, was temporary. The Traditional Values Alliance had lost this battle, but they wouldn't stop trying. That evening, as the students toured Pinnacle Tech's labs, Jonas received a video call from an unexpected source, James Crawford, calling from federal prison. You think you've won, Crawford said without preamble, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the senator's suits he'd once worn. Stopping one attack, converting one company. You're fighting symptoms, Harvey, not the disease. The disease is hatred, Crawford, and yes, I'm fighting it. The disease is change. For thousands of years, humanity organized itself naturally, the strong leading the weak, the intelligent guiding the simple, the superior managing the inferior. You're disrupting natural selection itself. Jonas laughed, surprising Crawford. Natural selection. You inherited your position, your wealth, your connections. There's nothing natural about a system that gives mediocre men power just for being born into the right family and race. And yet that system built civilization. No people built civilization. Many of them despite your system, not because of it. How many Einsteins died in cotton fields? How many Curies were denied education? How many innovations were we denied because you'd rather maintain power than maximize human potential? Crawford leaned closer to the camera. You're going to lose, Harvey. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Because people like me don't need to win everywhere. We just need to win enough places to maintain control. And we have patience. We've waited centuries. We can wait decades more. Except you can't, Jonas replied. Because every day you wait, more Destiny Washingtons discover their brilliance. More Keisha Thompsons claim their power. More Miguel Santoses rise from janitor to board chair. Your replacement isn't coming, it's here. Crawford's face twisted with rage. Eleanor visited you. My own mother betrayed me. But she doesn't know everything, Harvey. The Alliance has plans she never imagined. We're going to... The video cut off. Prison guards had terminated the call. But Crawford had revealed more than he'd intended. The Alliance had plans even Eleanor didn't know about, which meant they had sources Eleanor hadn't accessed. Jonas immediately called an emergency meeting. His core team assembled in the secure conference room, faces grim, as he relayed Crawford's threats. We need to go on offense, Victoria said. We've been playing defense reacting to their attacks. It's time we took the fight to them. How? Diane asked. They're shadows within shadows. The Alliance operates through shell companies' intermediaries cutouts. We don't even know who all the members are. Actually, Jamal said slowly, we might. I've been analyzing financial patterns looking for companies that suddenly started coordinating after the Alliance formed. There are 43 corporations whose behavior changed simultaneously, joint ventures that make no business sense, synchronized HR policy changes, coordinated political donations. Can you prove they're Alliance members? Not in court. But I can prove something else. They're all vulnerable to the same thing that destroyed Pinnacle's old guard. They all have invisible workforces full of suppressed talent and buried innovations. Jonas understood immediately. We don't attack the companies, we liberate their employees. Over the next week, Pinnacle Tech launched what business historians would later call the Great Liberation. Using social media encrypted channels and word-of-mouth networks, they reached out to service workers at all 43 suspected Alliance companies. The message was simple. Your ideas matter. Your innovations have value. Document everything. Every suggestion ignored every innovation, dismissed every moment of discrimination. Justice is coming. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of workers began documenting their experiences, recording meetings, preserving evidence. Janitors who'd designed efficiency improvements. Food service workers with MBAs forced into menial roles. Security guards with engineering solutions. They all emerged from invisibility. But the Alliance didn't remain passive. On the 10th day of the Great Liberation, Jonas arrived at Pinnacle to find the building surrounded by protesters. Not the grassroots kind, these were professionally organized with printed signs and coordinated chants. Harvey destroys families, read one sign. Reverse racism is still racism, read another. The protest's leader, a polished woman with a megaphone, was telling news cameras, Jonas Harvey claims to fight discrimination, but he discriminates against qualified white workers in favor of unqualified minorities. We have proof, leaked internal documents showing hiring quotas and reverse discrimination. Jonas recognized the tactic, accuse your enemy of what you're guilty of. But he also knew that in the current climate, such accusations could gain traction if not immediately countered. He walked directly into the crowd of protesters, his security team scrambling to follow. The cameras swiveled toward him as the crowd pressed close, some shoving, some shouting. But Jonas remained calm. You want to see our hiring practices? He called out. Let's look at them. Right now, complete transparency. He pulled out his tablet, connecting it to a portable screen Marcus quickly set up. The Pinnacle Tech hiring data appeared for all to see. In the past 3 years, we've hired 8,000 people. 41% white, 30% Asian, 18% Hispanic, 11% Black. Almost exactly matching the demographics of qualified applicants in Silicon Valley. Where's the reverse discrimination? The protest leader tried to interrupt, but Jonas continued. Now let's look at promotions. Every single one based on blind performance reviews, reviewers don't know the race or gender of who they're evaluating. The result? Talent rises regardless of background. That's not discrimination, that's meritocracy. You're manipulating the data, the protest leader started. Then let's look at your data, Jonas said, turning to face her. You're Patricia Mills, aren't you CEO of Millstone Industries Traditional Values Alliance, founding member and employer of exactly 0 black executives, despite operating in a city that's 23% African American? Patricia's face flushed. That's not relevant, isn't it? You're protesting discrimination while practicing it. You're claiming reverse racism while maintaining actual racism. Jonas addressed the cameras now. Every company in the Traditional Values Alliance shows the same pattern: homogeneous leadership, suppressed diversity, buried innovations from anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of belonging. He pulled up more data on his tablet. Millstone Industries' 8 discrimination lawsuits settled quietly in the past 5 years. Boardtech Solutions, a black engineer's renewable energy design stolen and patented by white management. Crestview Capital recordings of executives calling diversity white genocide. The crowd of protesters began to fragment. Some were true believers who stayed and shouted louder, but others, paid participants, began slipping away as they realized they were being filmed, supporting exposed racists. Patricia tried one last attack. You're worth billions while claiming to fight for the poor. You're a hypocrite, Harvey. I am worth billions, Jonas agreed. Billions I've pledged to education, healthcare, and innovation centers for underserved communities. What have you pledged, Patricia, besides maintaining a system that ensures only people like you succeed? Before Patricia could respond, something extraordinary happened. Windows throughout Pinnacle Tech opened, and workers began to appear, not just executives or engineers, but everyone. Janitors, food service, security, administrative staff, all standing together. Then they began to sing. Not a protest song or anthem, but something unexpected: lift every voice and sing, known as the Black National Anthem. But it wasn't just black employees singing. Everyone joined in their voices, creating a harmony that rolled over the protest like a wave. Jonas stood silently watching Patricia Mills and her remaining protesters realize they weren't fighting a company or even a movement. They were fighting the future itself, and the future had already won. As the protest dissolved and the media scattered to file their stories, Jonas received a text from an unknown number. Beautiful performance, but performances don't change reality. The Alliance has resources you can't imagine. What comes next will make everything else look like children's games. Jonas showed the message to Marcus, who immediately began tracing it. But Jonas knew they wouldn't find the source. The Alliance was learning, adapting, becoming more sophisticated in their hatred. That night, Jonas worked late, reviewing intelligence Jamal had gathered on Alliance companies. The pattern was clear: they were building a parallel economy, one where project preserves values could flourish, protected from progress. If they succeeded, they'd create an apartheid of opportunity, separate and unequal worlds that would never intersect. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Tuan Nguyen entered, the elderly janitor whose testimony had helped expose everything. But tonight, he wasn't carrying a mop. Mr. Harvey, I need to show you something. For 3 years, I've been documenting more than meetings. I've been tracking money. He spread papers across Jonas's desk. Financial transfers, shell companies, a web of connections that made Jonas's blood run cold. The Alliance isn't just 43 companies, Tuan explained. It's 430, maybe more. They've been building this for decades, maybe longer. Project Preserve was just the part that got exposed. Jonas studied the documents, his mind racing through implications. This is a shadow economy worth trillions. Yes, and they're planning to use it to crash the real economy if threatened. Look at these position shorts on every diversity-forward company, including Pinnacle. They're betting on our failure, and they have enough capital to cause it. How do you know all this? Tuan smiled sadly. Because for 40 years, I've been invisible in their offices, their homes, their private clubs. They discuss destroying lives while I clean their toilets. They plan economic warfare while I empty their trash. They never thought the immigrant janitor could understand complex financial instruments. We need to get this to the FBI, the SEC. No, Tuan interrupted. They have people there too. Some judges, some regulators enough to slow investigations until the alliance can adjust. We need something else, public exposure so complete that no amount of influence can hide it. Jonas thought of Crawford's threat, Patricia Mills's protests, the attempted murder of Destiny Washington. The alliance wasn't just fighting progress, they were willing to destroy the entire economy to maintain supremacy. Then we give them what they fear most, Jonas said quietly. We make their invisible workers visible, all of them, simultaneously. He picked up his phone, calling Diane. I need you to coordinate with every reform-minded CEO we know. We're going to announce something that will force the alliance to reveal themselves. What kind of announcement? The Visibility Accord. Any company that signs it commits to complete transparency, all salaries, public, all promotions documented, all innovations credited to their actual creators. No more buried brilliance, no more suppressed talent. Companies will never agree to that level of transparency. Some will. The ones who have nothing to hide, and when they do, when their stocks soar because transparency breeds trust, the alliance companies will be exposed by their refusal to sign. Diane was quiet for a moment. This will trigger economic war, Jonas. They'll use every resource, every connection, every weapon they have. Then we'd better make sure we win. The announcement of the Visibility Accord sent shockwaves through corporate America. Within 24 hours, 50 companies had signed on, their stocks immediately jumping as investors rewarded transparency. But the alliance response was swift and vicious. Coordinated sell-offs crashed the stocks of every accord signatory. Negative news stories appeared simultaneously across hundreds of outlets. Government investigations were suddenly launched into accord companies for potential antitrust violations. But Jonas had anticipated this. As the alliance revealed their network through their attacks, Jamal and his team tracked every transaction, every connection, building a map of the shadow economy. On the third day of what financial media called Transparency Tuesday, when markets were in freefall and the alliance seemed to be winning, Jonas played his final card. He called a press conference not at Pinnacle, but at the site of the first innovation center in Oakland, where they'd prevented Daniel Brennan's attempted murder. Behind him stood not just his team, but hundreds of workers from alliance companies, people who'd risked everything to expose the truth. 3 days ago, Jonas began, the Traditional Values Alliance tried to crash the American economy to prevent progress. They failed, but not because we stopped them. They failed because their own employees stopped them. He gestured to the crowd behind him. These brave individuals, many of whom will face retaliation, chose truth over comfort, justice over job security. They've provided evidence of the largest corporate conspiracy in American history. 430 companies coordinating to suppress wages, steal innovations, and maintain illegal discrimination. The evidence was released simultaneously, terabytes of documents, recordings, financial records. Every major media outlet received copies. The Department of Justice website crashed from citizens trying to access the files. But we're not seeking punishment. Jonas continued, surprising everyone. We're seeking transformation. Any alliance company that signs the Visibility Accord in the next 72 hours receives amnesty. Continue to resist and face the full consequences of your crimes. It was a masterstroke of strategic mercy. By offering redemption, Jonas split the alliance. Some companies, seeing the writing on the wall, immediately signed the accord. Others, the true believers, dug in for war. That war came from an unexpected direction. The next morning, Jonas woke to find Sarah, his daughter, calling frantically. Dad, they've taken the clinic. Armed men claiming to be federal marshals, but their badges don't check out. They're holding 30 patients and staff hostage. Jonas's blood went cold. The Jonas Harvey Medical Center in Boston, they'd attacked his daughter. Sarah, are you safe? I wasn't there. I was in surgery at the main hospital. But Dad, they have children in there. Patients from the innovation centers coming for treatment. This was Crawford's real plan, Jonas realized. Not economic warfare, but actual warfare, using his daughter and sick children as leverage. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered knowing who it would be. Hello, Jonas. Crawford's voice, but not from prison. Somehow he was free. I told you this would escalate. You should have left well enough alone. How are you out? Amazing what a presidential pardon can do. Turns out the president appreciates organizations that preserve traditional values. Now about those hostages. What do you want? Everything. Complete dissolution of Pinnacle Tech's diversity programs. Resignation from you and your entire leadership team. Transfer of controlling interest to a board we select. And the permanent closure of all innovation centers. You're insane. I'm desperate, Harvey. And desperate men do desperate things. You have 1 hour to publicly announce your compliance, or we start with the youngest hostage. I believe she's 8 years old recovering from leukemia treatment. Destiny Washington's little sister, actually. Poetic, don't you think? The line went dead. Jonas stood frozen for a moment, then exploded into action. He called Marcus the FBI, even William Chen, but the news was the same. Crawford had been pardoned that morning by a president facing his own scandals and needing alliance support. With 40 minutes left, Jonas made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone else. He went live on every platform simultaneously: television, internet, radio. My name is Jonas Harvey, and 30 minutes ago, James Crawford took hostages at the Elena Harvey Medical Center, including sick children. He's demanding I surrender everything we've built for their lives. He paused, looking directly into the camera. Senator Crawford, I know you're watching. You killed my wife. You've tried to kill children. You've corrupted justice itself with your hatred. But you've made one mistake. You think I'm the movement. I'm not. I'm just one man who learned to see clearly. Jonas pulled out a document, signing it on camera. This is my resignation as CEO of Pinnacle Tech, effective immediately. Keisha Thompson is now CEO. Jamal Washington is chairman. Miguel Santos remains board chair. Leadership passes to those you fear most, brilliant people of color who rose despite your system. He pulled out another document. This transfers my entire personal fortune to a trust managed by the Innovation Center students. Billions of dollars now controlled by the very children you're trying to destroy. Finally, he pulled out his car keys. And now, Senator Crawford, I'm coming to that medical center. Not as a CEO or a billionaire, but as a father whose daughter you've threatened and a human being who's tired of your terror. You want me. You've got me. But you'll have to look me in the eye when you pull the trigger, not hide behind hired guns and hostage children. The broadcast ended. Jonas was in his car before his security team could react, driving toward Boston and whatever awaited him there. His phone exploded with calls, Marcus, Diane, Sarah, all begging him not to go. He turned it off. But he wasn't alone. As Jonas drove, he began to notice other cars joining him. 1, then 10, then hundreds. The live stream of his announcement had gone viral, and people were responding. By the time he reached the medical center, thousands had gathered, workers, students, parents, all standing witness. Crawford stood on the medical center's roof, visible to all, a rifle in his hands. Turn around, Harvey. These people don't need to see what happens to heroes. I'm not a hero, Jonas called back, walking steadily forward. I'm just a janitor who learned to fight back. Stop or I start shooting hostages. Jonas stopped, but not because of the threat. He stopped because behind Crawford, in the windows of the medical center, the hostages had appeared. But they weren't cowering. They were standing united, unafraid. And leading them, despite her ongoing treatment, was 8-year-old Aisha Washington, Destiny's sister. The child's voice carried through a window Crawford had foolishly left open. Mr. Crawford, you're a bully, and my sister taught me what to do with bullies. You stand up to them. All 30 hostages began moving toward the roof access. Crawford spun, pointing his rifle at them, then back at Jonas, paralyzed by the loss of control. In that moment of hesitation, FBI snipers finally had clear shots. The rifle fell from Crawford's hands as he collapsed wounded but alive. The hostages were safe. The crisis was over. But Jonas didn't celebrate. He walked into the medical center past the freed hostages, past the cheering crowd to the room where Crawford was being treated for his wound. "Why?" Jonas asked simply. "Why so much hatred?" Crawford looked at him with eyes that held no remorse, only fury. "Because people like you are ending people like me. In 2 generations, maybe less, we'll be minorities in our own country. Everything we built, everything we are, will be diluted, diversified, destroyed. Everything you built was built on the backs of others. Everything you are came from denying others the chance to be. Your world isn't being destroyed, Crawford. It's being revealed as the lie it always was." Crawford turned away, but Jonas wasn't finished. "You killed Elena because you feared what I might become, but her death didn't break me. It transformed me. Every life you've destroyed, every dream you've deferred, they all transform into something stronger. You created your own downfall, Crawford. Hatred always does." Jonas left the medical center to find the crowd had grown to tens of thousands. They weren't just there for him, they were there for what his journey represented. The janitor who'd exposed an empire. The billionaire who'd given it all away. The man who'd chosen justice over comfort. Keisha Thompson, now CEO of Pinnacle Tech, stood at a makeshift podium. "Mr. Harvey resigned thinking he was protecting us. But we don't accept his resignation. The board voted unanimously Jonas Harvey remains CEO not because of his wealth or connections, but because he's earned it. From the ground up." The crowd erupted. Jonas tried to protest, but Jamal and Miguel literally carried him to the podium. "You started this revolution with a mop," Miguel said. "You don't get to abandon it just because the work got hard." Standing before the crowd, Jonas thought of the journey from that morning 3 years ago when he'd walked into Pinnacle as a janitor. Richard Connell in prison. Crawford headed back to a cell he'd never leave. The traditional values alliance exposed and crumbling. Innovation centers thriving across the nation. It wasn't victory. There would always be new battles, new forms of hatred to fight. But it was progress. Real, measurable, undeniable progress. "The revolution isn't finished," Jonas told the crowd. "It won't be finished in our lifetimes, but every day we push forward. Every day we make the invisible visible. Every day we prove that dignity isn't determined by job titles or skin color, but by how we treat each other." He looked at Destiny Washington standing with her newly freed sister, at Keisha Thompson carrying on her father's legacy, at Miguel Santos, who'd gone from mopping floors to chairing boards, at Tuan Nguyen, whose invisible observations had exposed an empire of hate. "They called me a janitor, like it was an insult," Jonas concluded. "But janitors see everything. We clean up messes. We maintain what others neglect. We do the work that keeps the world running even when no one notices. So yes, I'm a janitor. We all are. And it's time to clean house."